The sun over the Arizona territory was not a source of life. It was a hammer, beating the red earth into a fine, choking dust that coated everything. It baked the mesas and cracked the dry riverbeds, demanding a price in blood and sweat for every day spent beneath its glare. The wind was its accomplice, carrying the grit and the distant, imagined sound of gunfire. This was a land that promised freedom but usually delivered a grave. Eliza Thornton felt the grit between her teeth and the burn on her skin. She pulled the brim of her sweat-stained hat lower, trying to shield her eyes. Her horse, a weary bay gelding named Patience, plodded onward, its head low. They were alone, a single, slow-moving speck in an ocean of rock and heat. Eliza rode with a straight back, a discipline drilled into her by a life she had abandoned. But inside, she was crumbling. Her possessions were scant. A bedroll was tied behind her saddle. A canvas satchel held a near-empty canteen, a slab of jerky wrapped in cloth, and a small, leather-bound Bible. Tucked inside her saddlebag, beneath a spare shirt, was a letter. It was sealed with wax, addressed to her sister back in Texas, but it had remained unsent for 3 weeks. It was a coward's letter, full of justifications for a journey it was too late to turn back from. Her mind, stewed by the heat, kept drifting back to the white clapboard church in Texas, the smell of pine polish and the faint, sweet scent of hymnals, back to Luke, his hands, which had been surprisingly soft for a man who ran a freight line, his easy smile. He was a good man, a kind man, perhaps too kind for the world he had tried to build a life in. The memory that always came last, the one that felt like a physical blow, was of the town marshal standing on her porch, twisting his hat in his hands. He had mumbled his condolences. A robbery, he had said, the wagon carrying textiles and machinery. Gone, Luke and his driver. Found 2 days later, miles from the wagon. The killers were long gone. No witnesses, no leads, just another piece of violence swallowed by the territory. Eliza had sat in the front pew of that church for a week, numb, while the townspeople brought her casseroles and offered empty platitudes. They had expected her to weep, to collapse, to return to her family, a proper widow. On the 8th day, she had stood up, walked out of the church, sold the small house Luke had built for her, and packed her bags. She took nothing that reminded her of the soft life she had lost, save for one thing. Tucked into the waistband of her canvas trousers, rubbing her hip raw, was Luke's old Colt revolver. It was heavy, unfamiliar, a cold piece of iron that promised a justice the law could not. She had sworn on Luke's unmarked grave that she would find the men responsible. She had no plan, only a destination: the lawless borderlands near the Navajo reservation, where stolen goods and stolen lives were traded freely. She was so lost in the memory, in the righteous, hollow ache of her grief, that she almost missed the sound, a faint click, the sound of metal on rock, sharp and unnatural, cutting through the low moan of the wind. Patience's ears twitched. The horse stopped, its body tensing. "What is it, boy?" Eliza whispered, her hand hovering over the grip of the colt. A voice, thick and greasy, cut through the air. "Well now, looky here, boys. A lost little lamb." 3 men emerged from the shadow of the boulders, their horses blocking the narrow path. They were rough, their faces obscured by grime and coarse beards. The one who had spoken, a large man with a stained duster and tobacco juice marking his chin, smiled, revealing broken, yellow teeth. This was Jeb Crowley. Though Eliza did not know his name, she only knew the look in his eyes. It was the look of a wolf sizing up a meal. "That's a fine-looking horse for a lady all alone," Crowley said, his gaze sliding over Eliza, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "I am not looking for trouble," Eliza said, her voice shaking despite her best effort to keep it steady. "Please, let me pass." "Oh, we'll let you pass, sweetheart." Another man cackled, his rifle held loosely in his hands. "After you pay the toll, your horse, your supplies, and maybe a little company." Crowley edged his horse closer. "Get off the horse, ma'am, nice and slow." Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The violence she had been chasing had found her first. Her hand closed around the Colt's handle. She remembered Luke showing her how to use it, his patient instruction. Point and squeeze. "Liza, do not pull, just squeeze." She pulled the gun, but it was a clumsy, desperate motion. The long barrel snagged on her belt. Crowley laughed. "Spirited? Ain't she? I like that." He raised his own pistol, his aim casual and certain. A blur of motion came from the rocks above them. It was not a sound, but a sudden absence of it, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Then came a sound like a hawk striking, a sharp, guttural cry. A man, his skin the color of the red earth, dropped from the ledge onto the back of the third rider. A knife flashed, a quick, brutal arc. The man slumped forward, dead before he could even cry out. Crowley spun, his eyes wide, firing his pistol in a panic. The shot went wide, echoing off the canyon walls. The attacker was already moving. He was tall, impossibly fast, a phantom of sinew and dark, flowing hair. He wore buckskin leggings and a torn shirt that might have once belonged to a soldier. He launched himself from the dead man's horse, a tomahawk appearing in his hand. The second man raised his rifle, but the hawk was on him. The weapon in the stranger's hand was a blur, embedding itself in the man's chest with a sickening thud. It was over in less than 10 seconds. 2 men were down. Jeb Crowley stared, his face pale with shock. He fumbled to reload his pistol. The stranger did not rush him. He walked forward, retrieving his tomahawk with a calm, practiced motion. He was tall, broader than Eliza had first thought, and he moved with a grace that was terrifying. A long, puckered scar ran from his shoulder down his arm, disappearing into his shirt. Crowley finally raised his gun. "Damn you, savage!" he screamed, his voice cracking. The stranger's hand moved to his own hip, to a knife sheathed there. He did not draw it. He just watched. Crowley pulled the trigger. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. A look of pure, animal terror washed over Crowley's face. He threw the useless gun down and wheeled his horse, kicking it savagely. "Beckett'll hear this. He'll hunt you down." The stranger watched him go, making no move to follow. He let the man flee, a messenger of the slaughter. The silence that fell was heavier and more frightening than the gunfire. Eliza was still sitting on patience, her hand frozen on the grip of her own gun. She was shaking so hard she thought she might fall. The man turned. He was Navajo. She was sure of it, but unlike any she had ever seen. His features were sharp, his jaw strong, but it was his eyes that held her. They were black, cold, and utterly empty of emotion. He looked at her, at the gun in her hand, and then at her face. His gaze was not hostile. It was not curious. It was assessing, as if she were just another part of the landscape, a rock or a lizard. He walked over to the man he had killed with the tomahawk. He knelt, checking the man's pockets, and then pulled back his collar on the man's neck. Eliza could see a fresh brand, a simple B. The stranger stood. He finally spoke, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together. "Beckett's men do not get to live." He wiped his tomahawk clean on the dead man's shirt and slid it back into its loop on his belt. He then walked to the first man he had killed, the one with the knife, and did the same. Retrieving his blade, he did not look at Eliza again. He whistled, a low, sharp sound, and a horse, a magnificent black stallion with a wild mane, trotted out from the rocks. Eliza's mind was reeling. She had been raised on stories of savage Indians, of scalping and brutality. This man, Tahan Grey Wolf, though she did not know his name, had just saved her life. Yet he fit every nightmare she had ever been told. He had killed 2 men without a sound, without a flicker of remorse. He, in turn, looked at her as if she were nothing, a white woman, trespassing on land that had been stolen from his people, too weak to even defend herself. He saw her fine-boned features, her wide, terrified blue eyes, and the useless, expensive gun in her trembling hand. He saw her as an intrusion, another complication in a world that was already full of them. And yet, as he mounted his horse, he did not ride away. He watched her for a long moment. There was something in that look, beneath the ice, that was not contempt. It was a flicker of recognition, a brief, shared understanding of the violence they had both just witnessed. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. The desert, which had been an oven, was already growing cold. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in as many minutes. Without a word, the stranger dismounted and began gathering brush. He built a fire, small, contained, and efficient, using a flint and steel. The flames caught, a small island of light in the vast, gathering dark. He settled himself on the far side of the fire, his back against a rock, his stallion cropping at some dry grass nearby. He pulled a piece of jerky from his own pouch and began to chew, his gaze fixed on the flames. Eliza's fear was warring with a cold, practical reality. She would freeze to death without a fire, and the wolves would come. She could already hear them, a faint, lonely howl in the distance. Slowly, her limbs stiff and awkward, she dismounted from patience. She kept her hand near her gun, though she knew it would be useless against him. She untied her bedroll and sat on the other side of the fire. A dozen feet away, a chasm of silence and suspicion separating them. She fumbled for her own jerky, her hands still shaking. The firelight flickered on his face, highlighting the sharp planes of his cheeks and the darkness of his eyes. He did not speak. He did not acknowledge her. The desert night closed in around them, vast and cold. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the occasional stamp of a horse, and the distant, hungry call of the wolves. Eliza Thornton, the widow from Texas, sat in silence, guarded by the very man she had been taught to fear, a savage who had just saved her life. An alliance had been formed, not with words, but with shared warmth in a place that offered none. And as she watched the warrior, Tahan Greywolf, she knew her old life was not just lost, it was burned away. The light that woke Eliza was not the gentle dawn of Texas. It was a cold, gray knife edge that sliced across the canyon, promising nothing but more heat to come. Her body was stiff, her bones aching from the hard ground. For a confused moment, she wondered where she was. And then the memory of the previous day crashed down on her, the ambush, the brutal, silent killings, and the man who now sat across the small, dying fire. He was already awake, or perhaps he had never slept. He was checking the hooves of his black stallion, his movements economical and precise. He had not so much as glanced in her direction. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. She was alive because he had allowed it. He had killed 2 men in the space of a breath, and then had shared his fire as if it were nothing. She watched him, her fear a hard knot in her stomach. He was a savage, a word she had used her whole life without thought, and he had proven how savage he could be. Yet, he had not harmed her. He had let that other man, the one called Crowley, escape. Why? Tahan Greywolf finished with his horse and turned his attention to his own gear. He moved with a purpose that was unsettling. He was preparing to leave. Eliza realized with a jolt of panic that he might ride off and leave her, as terrifying as he was. The thought of being left alone in this wasteland, with 2 fresh corpses nearby, was worse. He slung a saddlebag over his shoulder and straightened up. His torn shirt, the one that looked like it had been taken from a soldier, shifted against his chest. Eliza saw it then, a glint of dull silver against his dark skin. It was a necklace, a heavy-looking chain, but it was the medallion that made her blood freeze. It was tarnished, but the shape was unmistakable. An eagle, with arrows clutched in its talons, a United States cavalry insignia. Her mind, fractured by grief and fear, seized on the image. Luke, her Luke. His freight wagon had been carrying supplies for the army. Textiles, she had been told, and machine parts for the fort. The marshal had said the attackers were ruthless. They had taken everything. The man before her was a Navajo warrior. He wore a soldier's shirt and a soldier's insignia. He had killed 2 men without flinching. The fear in Eliza's stomach did not vanish. It crystallized. It turned into a cold, hard rage that burned away her doubt. This was him. This was the man who had taken her life from her, the man who had left Luke in the dirt. Her hand moved, faster than she had thought possible. The weight of Luke's colt was familiar now, a solid, righteous extension of her will. She did not snag it on her belt this time. She raised it with both hands. The long barrel pointed directly at his heart. Her hands were perfectly steady. "You were there," she whispered, her voice a low, ragged sound. "You killed him. You killed my husband." Tahan did not flinch. He did not raise his hands. His black eyes simply met hers. He had been a dozen feet away, and in the time it took her to draw a breath, he was on her. He moved like a panther, not a man. He did not go for his own weapons. He simply closed the distance. One hand, hard as iron, clamped around her right wrist. He did not slap the gun away. He twisted her wrist, a sharp, agonizing rotation that sent shards of pain up her arm. A small, involuntary cry escaped her lips. The colt dropped from her numb fingers into the dust. In the same fluid motion, his other arm wrapped around her waist, yanking her off her feet and hard against his chest. She slammed into him, the air forced from her lungs. She was enveloped in the scent of him, of dust, leather, and something wild and musky. His strength was absolute, his body a wall of muscle that pinned her effortlessly. He held her there for a second, her feet dangling above the ground, her face inches from his. His gaze was cold, searching, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something in their depths. It was not anger. It was something closer to disappointment. He let her slide down until her boots touched the ground, but he did not release her. He held her easily with one arm. With his free hand, he retrieved a leather thong from his belt. He pulled her bound hands in front of her, his grip impersonal and rough. He bound her wrists together, the knots swift and efficient. They were not tight enough to cut off her circulation, but they were impossible to escape. He released her, and she stumbled back a step. He bent, picked up her colt, and looked at it for a long moment. He did not check if it was loaded. He simply tucked it into the back of his own belt, a prize taken, an extension of her will now possessed by him. He finally looked at her. A prisoner now, disarmed and humiliated. "You think I killed your husband?" He stated. It was not a question. Eliza's rage was smothered by a new wave of terror. She was helpless. "You wear his badge!" She spat, the words weak. Tahan's expression did not change. He did not bother to deny it. He simply tilted his head. "If you believe that," he said, his voice the same low, rough monotone. "Come to my village. I will show you the truth." He turned from her and walked to her horse, Patience, who had been watching the scene with nervous eyes. He took the gelding's reins. "If you run," he said, not looking back at her, "you will die out here. The wolves, or Beckett's men, your choice." He gestured with his head for her to mount. Her hands were bound, but he did not help her. He watched, his face impassive, as she struggled, hooking her bound hands over the saddle horn and clumsily hauling herself into the saddle. The shame burned hotter than the sun. He mounted his own stallion, a single, fluid motion. He took hold of Patience's reins, leading her horse like a pack animal. He did not speak again. He simply kicked his horse into a walk, heading deeper into the uncharted territory, pulling Eliza along, a captive bound for a destination she could not imagine. Eliza's mind was a storm of fear, fury, and a tiny, persistent flicker of curiosity. What truth? What could he possibly show her in a savage's village that would prove his innocence? She had seen the proof hanging around his neck, and yet he had not killed her. He could have, easily. He was taking her somewhere. Her vow for justice felt hollow now, a child's boast. She was just a woman, alone, and at the mercy of the man she had sworn to kill. They rode for hours. The sun climbed, returning to its work of hammering the world flat. The silence was broken only by the plod of the horse's hooves and the sigh of the wind. In the afternoon, the wind changed. It stopped being a sigh and became a whine, a high-pitched, abrasive sound that got under her skin. The air grew thick, the blue sky turning a sickly yellow-brown. Tahan stopped. He scanned the horizon, his body tense. He dismounted and pulled his horse toward the shelter of a shallow overhang of red rock. "Get down," he commanded. Eliza scrambled off her horse, her bound hands making the movement awkward. "A storm," he said. He pulled a rolled blanket from his stallion's saddlebag and tossed it at her. It landed at her feet. "Cover yourself. Do not breathe deep, and stay against the rock." He took no such precautions for himself, save for covering his horse's head with a feed bag and turning the animal to face the rock wall. He settled himself on his haunches near the opening of the overhang, his back to her, watching the world disappear. The storm hit them like a freight train. It was not wind. It was a solid wall of red dust and sand, moving at a speed Eliza could not comprehend. The world vanished. The sun was gone. The sky was gone. There was only a roaring, suffocating darkness. The sound was a physical weight, a scream that seemed to come from inside her own head. Eliza huddled against the rock, pulling the rough blanket over her head, tasting the grit on her lips, feeling it sting her eyes even through the wool. She pressed her face into her knees, her bound hands trapped beneath her. She was terrified she would be buried alive, that the air itself would be stolen from her lungs. She was smaller than an ant, utterly helpless before the power of the land. She did not know how long it lasted. 2 hours, maybe 3. Tahan did not move. He sat facing the storm, a stone silhouette against the churning red darkness, as if he were a part of it, as unmoving as the rock they hid behind. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it was over. The roar subsided, fading back into a low moan. The dust began to settle. Eliza lowered the blanket, coughing, her lungs burning. Every inch of her skin, her clothes, her hair, was coated in a fine, gritty red powder. She looked at Tahan. He was a statue of red dust, only his black eyes moving as he scanned the changed landscape. He stood, shaking the dust from his shoulders. He said nothing about the storm. He just walked to his horse, uncovered its head, and checked its bindings. Eliza's canteen, which had been hanging from her saddle horn, was gone, ripped away by the wind. She realized her throat was parched, her lips already cracking. Tahan saw her looking. He walked over, unhooked his own canteen, and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at her bound hands. He uncorked it, his expression unchanging, and held it to her lips. She drank. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most precious thing she had ever known. He gave her 3 sips, a measured, practical amount, then capped it and hooked it back on his belt. He was not being kind. He was keeping his prisoner alive. They rode on. The land was scoured, alien, the tracks they had been following completely erased, but Tahan seemed to navigate by some internal map, his gaze fixed on distant, unremarkable peaks. That night, the cold was sharper. The fire Tahan built was small, the brush scarce. Eliza huddled by it, her stomach aching with hunger. Tahan offered her a strip of jerky, and she ate it ravenously, chewing the tough, salty meat while her hands remained tied. Then came the howls. They were not distant, as they had been the night before. They were close, a chorus of hungry yips and long, mourning cries. Eliza's head snapped up. She saw them, green gold eyes, pairs of them, floating in the darkness just beyond the firelight. A pack, 10, maybe more. They were circling, growing bolder. She looked at Tahan. He had not reached for her gun, or his own tomahawk. He sat calmly, watching the darkness. He pulled the long knife from his belt, its blade gleaming in the firelight. That was all. A large wolf, bolder than the rest, crept forward, its belly low to the ground, its lips curling back in a snarl. Tahan stood. He did not shout. He did not make a grand motion. He simply rose to his full height, a shadow of pure menace against the flames. He held the knife at his side, its point down. He took one step toward the wolf, and he made a sound, a low, guttural growl from deep in his chest. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of a predator, a warning from something more dangerous than they were. The lead wolf stopped. It whined, tucked its tail, and backed away. The other pairs of eyes hesitated, then began to fade, one by one, back into the night. Tahan stood there for a full minute, listening. Before he returned to the fire, he sat, sheathed his knife, and picked up his jerky as if nothing had happened. Eliza stared at him. He had saved her, again, from Crowley, from the storm, from the wolves. Her hands were still bound, her gun still at his hip, but he had protected her. Her image of him as a brutal killer, the murderer of her husband, was beginning to fray, like a rope pulled too tight. His actions did not match. "Who is Beckett?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the dust and the silence. He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. He stared into the fire, his face a mask of old grief. "He is a man who burns worlds," Tahan said, his voice so low she barely heard him. "He burned mine. He sells guns to the Apache. He sells my people to the mines in Mexico. He is a ghost who leaves only bodies." He turned his head, and his black eyes met hers across the flames. "Your husband, he was in Beckett's way, just as those men yesterday were in his way." The pieces clicked into place, sharp and painful. Tahan was not Luke's killer. He was hunting Beckett, just as she was. The insignia, the soldier's shirt, they were not trophies. They were clues, or perhaps something else entirely, a past. Eliza looked down at her bound hands, the leather thong rubbing her skin raw. She had pulled a gun on him. She had accused him. She, in her righteous, ignorant grief, had pointed her finger at the one man who seemed to understand the violence that had shattered her life. The savage had shown more honor than any white man she had met since leaving Texas. The real monsters were men like Crowley, men like the unseen Beckett, men who looked like her, who spoke her language. The certainty that had been her armor, her reason for this entire journey, cracked and fell away. She was not a righteous avenger. She was a fool, and she was tied to a man whose pain, she suspected, ran deeper and colder than her own. The journey to Tahan's village took another 2 days. The land became harsher, a maze of sheer red rock and deep, shadowed canyons where the sun never reached. Eliza's hope that he was leading her to some kind of truth had curdled back into a dull fear. He had cut her bonds after the first night, tossing the leather thong into the fire. A silent admission that her accusation had been wrong, but he had not returned her gun. She rode behind him, no longer led by a rope, but a prisoner just the same, bound by his will and the terrifying, alien landscape. Her shame had subsided, replaced by a watchful, wary silence. She studied him, the way he read the stones, the bend of a branch, the flight of a hawk. He was as much a part of this land as the rock itself. He was nothing like Luke. Luke had moved against the land, trying to tame it with wagons and contracts. Tahan moved with it. The realization was unsettling. Late on the third day, he stopped at the edge of a sheer cliff. Below them, hidden in a deep, circular canyon fed by a thin green ribbon of a stream, was the village. It was not the collection of crude teepees she had imagined. These were hogans, solid, octagonal structures made of mud and timber, their doorways facing the rising sun. Smoke rose from chimneys in their centers, a peaceful, domestic sight that seemed utterly at odds with the man who had brought her here. As they descended the narrow, winding path, a dog barked, then another. Figures emerged from the hogans. Children stopped their play, their dark eyes wide. Women, grinding corn on flat stones, paused, their hands still. The entire village went silent. They were not welcoming. As Tahan rode into the center of the settlement, dismounting from his stallion, the stares turned from curiosity to open hostility. Eliza sat frozen on patience, every eye in the village fixed on her. They looked at her as she had first looked at Tahan, with fear and contempt. She was the Bilagana, the white woman, the ghost, in her dusty, torn traveling clothes, her hair matted with red sand, her skin burned by the sun. She was an omen, an intruder from the world that had brought them nothing but pain and broken treaties. A group of women, their faces hard, began to whisper, their voices sharp and angry. An old man, his face a map of deep wrinkles and his hair a pure, stark white, stepped forward. He carried a staff, and his eyes, though clouded with age, burned with authority. He spoke to Tahan, his voice a low, guttural rasp. Eliza could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. He was angry. He was demanding an explanation. He gestured at Eliza, his hands shaking with age and fury. Tahan stood tall, his face impassive, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders. He responded, his voice calm and steady, but the old man cut him off, shouting now, jabbing his staff toward Eliza. A few of the younger men, warriors with rifles in their hands, began to move, forming a loose, threatening circle. Eliza's heart hammered. They were going to kill her. Tahan had brought her here to be judged by his people. Her hand instinctively went to her hip, where her gun was supposed to be. It was empty. Tahan looked at the closing circle. He looked at the old man. Then he looked at Eliza, his gaze holding hers for a single, unreadable second. He turned back to the elder and he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring, silencing the entire village. He spoke in his own language, but 2 words, spoken with a hard, possessive finality, resonated in a way she almost understood. Then he turned his head, his black eyes sweeping over the crowd, and he said it again, in English. A declaration not for her, but for them.
She is my prize.
He paused, letting the words sink in, a brand on her. Touch her, he continued, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. And you answer to me. The silence that followed was absolute. The old man stared, his mouth open. The warriors froze. The declaration was an insult to them, but it was also a sacred claim. A warrior's right. He had claimed her as his property, spoils of a war they did not know he was fighting. He had shielded her with his own honor, using their laws against them. No one would touch the prize of Tahan Grey Wolf. He turned his back on them, a deliberate dismissal. He grabbed Patience's reins and motioned for Eliza to dismount. Her legs were shaking so badly she almost fell. He led her to a hogan on the edge of the village, set slightly apart from the others. He pulled back the blanket covering the doorway and gestured for her to enter. She ducked inside. It was dark, the only light coming from the smoke hole in the ceiling and the low fire in the center pit. It was larger inside than it looked, clean and warm, the air smelling of juniper smoke and dry herbs. Sheepskins were piled neatly against one wall. He followed her in, letting the blanket fall. plunging them into a dim, intimate light. He did not look at her. He moved to the fire, adding a few sticks of wood. His movements precise. He had saved her life again, but in a way that felt like a different kind of death. The rage, when it came, was a welcome, cleansing heat. It burned away the last of her fear. She was not a prize. She was not his property. She was Eliza Thornton, a widow from Texas, and she would not be owned. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. He did not turn. "I kept you alive. They would have sent you out, or they would have killed you. By calling me your thing a trophy you won. You strip me of my dignity to save my skin. That is not a kindness. That is a cage." He finally turned to look at her. His face was in shadow, the firelight catching the silver of the medallion at his throat, the one that had started all this. "Dignity is a word for people who are safe. You are not safe here. You are a white woman in a land where your people are the enemy. I have given you my protection. That is all." "Protection?" she laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You have made me a slave." He stood to his full height, and for the first time, his cold calm broke. A flash of fire lit his eyes. "You know nothing of slavery, woman." The raw pain in his voice stopped her, but she would not back down. She had been silent too long. She had been afraid too long. She took a step toward him, her hands clenched at her sides. "I am not your prize, Tahan." It was the first time she had used his name. It felt strange and powerful on her tongue. "I am not a possession you can claim in front of your tribe." He watched her, his head tilted. That same assessing look he had given her in the canyon. He was surprised by her fire. She met his gaze, unflinching. "If I am a prize," she said, her voice low and clear, "then you will not claim me. You will win me. If you want my respect, if you want anything from me, you will beg for it." She held her breath, expecting an explosion. He was a warrior, a man of violence and pride. She had challenged him, insulted him in his own home. He did not move for a long time. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then, the impossible happened. The corner of his mouth twitched. It was not a smile. It was the barest shadow of one, a flicker of dry amusement that was almost more unsettling than his anger. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as an intrusion or a burden, but as a person, an equal force. "Ta," he said softly. "I will wait for that day." He turned from her then, took a dried skin of water, and left the hogan, leaving her alone with her shaking hands and the echo of her own impossible challenge. She did not sleep that night. She lay on the sheepskins he had left for her, her mind racing. She had defied a killer, a savage, and he had accepted it. He had not struck her. He had not shouted. He had listened. Hours passed. The village outside was silent, asleep under a blanket of stars so thick it looked like spilled salt. A deep loneliness settled on her, heavier than any she had felt before. She was trapped, a pariah among her own people, an outcast among these. Then she heard it, a sound so faint she thought it was the wind, a low, mournful chant. It was not a howl of war. It was a song of deep, profound, and utterly human grief. She rose from the skins, her bare feet silent on the hard-packed earth floor. She pushed aside the blanket of the doorway. The desert air was cold, sharp in her lungs. The song was coming from the edge of the canyon, away from the sleeping village. She followed it, a moth drawn to a different kind of flame. She found him standing near the cliff edge, his back to her, his arms raised to the moonless sky. He was not the cold, impassive warrior now. He was a man undone. His voice, which she had only known as a low rasp, was beautiful, a deep baritone that cracked with an agony that tore at her. He was singing to the ghosts, to the spirits that lived in the rocks and the stars. She stayed in the shadows, ashamed to be witnessing something so private. She watched as his song quieted, his arms falling to his sides. He stood motionless for a long time. She thought he was praying. Then she saw the glint of moisture on his cheek, silver in the starlight. He was weeping. This man of stone and violence was weeping, silently, his shoulders shaking with the effort of it. Her anger, her pride, her fear, it all dissolved. It washed away, leaving only a hollow, aching empathy. She knew that kind of grief. It was the same grief that lived in her own chest, the one she carried for Luke. She must have made a sound, a shifting of her foot on the gravel, because he stiffened. He did not turn. "Go back to the hogan," he said, his voice thick, ruined by his tears. She did not move. "Who was it for?" she whispered. He was silent. She thought he would tell her to leave again. Was a song for the dead, a song for a warrior who cannot find his way home." "Who?" she asked again, softer this time. He bowed his head. The long, black hair hid his face. "My son," he whispered, "and his mother, my wife." Eliza felt the breath leave her body. "Beckett," he continued, his voice a dead, flat thing. "He did not come for me. I was away, scouting for the army, the same army that gave me this." He touched the silver medallion at his throat. "Beckett came for my people, for the women and children. He burned my hogan. They were inside." He finally turned, and his face in the starlight was a mask of such desolation that Eliza had to look away. "He burned my world, Bilagana," he said, using the name his people had for her. "So I will burn his—" She had no words. Her own loss, the loss of Luke, felt small and pale next to the inferno of his. He had lost everything, and he had found her, a woman hunting the same demon. She understood now. The coldness, the silence, the brutality. They were his armor, the only things holding him together. She had just seen the man underneath, and he was as broken as she was. She backed away, stumbling once, then turned and fled back to the shadows of the hogan. She buried her face in the sheepskins, her body shaking, but she was not crying for Luke. She was crying for the warrior who had called her his prize, a man who had nothing left to claim but his revenge. And as she lay there, a new, dangerous emotion sparked in the tinder of her grief. It was not just pity. It was a fierce, protective, and terrifying kinship. The morning after his confession, the village was a different place. The suspicion was still there, a wall of sharp glances and silence. But Tahan's grief had given him a new, more dangerous aura. He was not just a warrior. He was a man with nothing left to lose. The other Navajo gave him a wide berth, and by extension, they left Eliza alone. She was still the white ghost, the Bilagana, but she was his ghost, and he was a man communing with the dead. Eliza woke in the hogan to find him gone. When she stepped out into the cold morning light, she saw him speaking with the old man, the elder, and a young, lean Navajo who had just ridden in. The young man's horse was lathered, its flanks heaving. He was a scout, and he brought news. Tahan turned from the group and walked to her. The man from the cliff top, the weeping, broken man, was gone. The warrior was back, his face a mask of cold stone, his eyes black and empty. "Beckett," he said. His voice was flat. "He is moving. He has a shipment of rifles. He is taking them to the Red Hills, to sell to the NDE. Eliza frowned. The NDE? Apache, bounty hunters. He arms them both. He wants this land to burn. It makes it easier for him to catch my people when the soldiers are busy fighting ghosts." He turned, walking toward his black stallion, checking the saddle straps. It was clear he was preparing to ride. "When do we leave?" Eliza asked, her voice quiet but firm. Tahan paused. He did not turn. "You do not. You will stay here. The women will give you food. You will be safe." "I am not safe," she said. walking to stand behind him. Not as long as he is alive. He killed my husband. He destroyed your family. This is my fight as much as it is yours. He turned slowly. His gaze was hard, dismissive. You are slow. You are weak. You are a white woman. You will be a burden I cannot afford. The words stung, but she did not flinch. I am a shadow, she said, meeting his eyes. I am the one he will not look for. Standing next to you, you are right. I am not a warrior, but I am a widow, and I will not be left behind. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Annoyance, but also, perhaps, a sliver of respect. She had put him in a bind. His prize was refusing to stay. If I go, she pressed, I am your captive. No one will think twice. If I stay, I am a target. For your people, or for him. If he finds this place. He stared at her for a long, heavy moment. He walked past her, into the hogan. When he came out, he tossed something heavy at her feet. It was her gun belt, with the Colt revolver. You will not slow me down, he said. You will not speak. You will ride where I ride. And if I tell you to run, you will run. If I tell you to hide, you will become a stone. Do you understand this? I understand, she said, strapping the belt around her hips. The weight of it was a comfort. He gave her a long knife in a sheath. You will need this more. They rode east, away from the hidden canyon, into the rising sun. The land changed. The flat, dusty plains gave way to a violent upthrust of red rock. A maze of sheer cliffs and mountains that looked like the bones of the earth, raw and bleeding. This was the land of the Apache. Tahan was no longer just a rider. He was a phantom. He moved through the rocks with a silence that was unnerving, his stallion seeming to know where to place its hooves. He pushed them hard. Eliza's body ached. Her legs, unaccustomed to such riding, were rubbed raw. Her shoulders burned. But she did not complain. She just watched him, and she learned. He was a brutal, impatient teacher. He did not instruct, he corrected, his voice a low hiss. You ride like a sack of feed, he said on the first day, his horse stopping so suddenly she almost ran into him. You let the horse do the work. You must be the horse. Your legs, your back. Move with him. He made her ride without using the reins, guiding patience with her knees, feeling the shift of the animal's muscles beneath her. She fell twice, hard, on the rocky ground. He just sat on his stallion and watched. Get up! She got up, bruised and humiliated, and got back on. He taught her to see. He would stop, pointing at the ground. What do you see? Nothing. Rocks, she would say. He would dismount and crouch, tracing a line in the dust with his finger. A displaced stone, a broken twig. 3 men, 2 hours ago. 1 horse is lame. He forced her to look, to see the subtle, almost invisible language of the earth. He taught her to walk without sound, to listen to the wind, to tell the difference between the call of a hawk and the cry of a man imitating one. On the 3rd day, in a narrow pass that stank of dried juniper, the lesson became real. An arrow appeared from the rocks above, thudding into the cliff face not 6 inches from her head. Apache! Tahan's voice was not a shout. It was a sharp, explosive command. He was off his horse before the arrow had stopped quivering, his tomahawk and knife in his hands, a shadow melting into the shadows of the rocks. Eliza scrambled from patience, pulling the colt, her heart slamming against her ribs. She pressed her back to the rock, her horse snorting in panic beside her. She heard a scuffle, a grunt, and then a terrible, wet silence. She peered around the rock. A man, his body painted, was charging her. He had seen Tahan go the other way. He saw her, the white woman, the easy kill. He raised a rifle, not to shoot, but to use as a club, to dash her brains out. Eliza did not think. She did not aim. She just raised the heavy pistol with both hands. as Luke had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The sound was a deafening explosion in the narrow canyon. It ripped the air apart. The Apache warrior stopped. His eyes were wide, a look of profound, almost childlike surprise on his face. He looked down at the red, spreading stain on his chest, then back at her. He crumpled to the ground, his rifle clattering on the stones. Elvidio. A man is riding a horse, his hat covering his face. He is wearing a long coat and carrying a rifle. The horse is walking slowly through a dry, dusty landscape. This video might not be accurately generated. View the still frame to judge. Silence. The ringing in her ears was the only sound. Tahan emerged from the rocks, his knife bloody. He looked at the man he had killed, and then at the man at Eliza's feet. He walked over to her. She was still pointing the gun, smoke curling from the barrel. Her whole body was shaking, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. But her eyes, when she looked up at him, were not crying. They were steady. They were cold. She had crossed a line, and she knew it. Tahan looked at her, then at the dead man. He gave a single, curt nod. He pulled the arrow from the rock wall. "You have brought the others," he said. "The shot. We move, now." He grabbed the reins of his horse. Eliza holstered the Colt, her hands fumbling as she tried to reload a fresh cartridge. But her fingers, though shaking, did the job. She mounted patience, her body moving with the new, learned economy. She was no longer a widow from Texas. She was a woman who had just killed a man. They rode hard for 2 more days, avoiding the main trails, pushing the horses to their limit. They slept for only a few hours at a time, without a fire, chewing on dry jerky. The shared danger and the violence had stripped away the last of their barriers. They were no longer white and native, man and woman. They were 2 hunters, bound by a single purpose. The small gestures came without thought. When they crossed a fast, shallow river, Patience stumbled on a loose rock. Tahan's hand shot out, his grip like iron on her forearm, steadying her. The touch was impersonal, a reflex, but it sent a jolt through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. His skin was rough against hers. He passed her his canteen, and she drank, then handed it back, their fingers brushing. She took the first watch that night, sitting with her rifle across her knees, her eyes scanning the moonlit rocks. While he slept, she watched him sleep. His face, in repose, lost its hardness. He looked younger, almost peaceful, but his hand never left the hilt of his knife. They finally stopped in the high hills, in a cluster of pines that overlooked a long, dusty trade route. They were close. Tahan risked a small, smokeless fire, hidden by the rocks. The night was cold, the stars sharp and bright. The silence between them was comfortable now, not heavy. Eliza stared into the small flames, the memory of the Apache's surprised face floating in the embers. "Luke would have been terrified," she said, her voice quiet. Tahan did not look up. He was sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The shing, 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 a rhythmic, soothing sound. "He was a good man," she continued, needing to say it, needing to explain. "He believed in contracts, in the goodness of people. He thought a firm handshake was all the armor a man needed in this world." She picked up a twig, breaking it in her fingers. "He trusted the men he hired. He trusted the army. He used to say that civilization was just around the corner." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "He was so kind. Tahan, he was a good, gentle man." She looked at him, her throat tightening. "But he was weak. This land, it does not suffer weakness. It found his and it killed him for it." It was a terrible, disloyal thing to say, but it was the truth. It was the truth that had been festering in her heart since she had left Texas. Tahan stopped sharpening his knife. The silence stretched. He looked at her, and his gaze was not cold. It was not impassive. It was warm, heavy. and filled with a profound, weary understanding. He did not see her as a Bilagana then. He saw her as she was a survivor, forged in the same fire that had consumed him. "Weakness is not a sin," he said, his voice low. "But here, it is a death sentence, for everyone." He looked away, back to the fire. "My wife, she was not weak. She was strong. She knew the songs of the earth. My son, he was a child. He was strong. Like her, Beckett killed them anyway." The shared grief settled over them. A heavy, warm blanket against the cold. They were not so different. The next morning, they found it. Tahan's tracking, his uncanny ability to read the land, led them to a box canyon, its entrance hidden by a rock fall. He found the tracks. Wagons, heavy. Hidden beneath a cluster of boulders and covered with tarps and dry brush were the crates. Dozens of them. New Winchester rifles, still in their grease. Boxes of ammunition, barrels of whiskey. "Beckett's," Tahan breathed. His hand clenched on his knife. "Enough to start a war. He means to arm them all, Apache and bounty hunter. Let them kill each other, and he will take what is left." "We have to destroy it," Eliza said. "Yes." He began pulling the tarps off, piling dry brush against the crates. They would burn it all. A voice, lazy and cruel, echoed from the rocks above them. "Well now, Tahan, I'd stop right there if I were you. The colonel is very particular about his property." Eliza spun, her gun in her hand. On the ridge above them stood Jeb Crowley, the man from the ambush, his yellow teeth bared in a grin. He had a rifle, and it was pointed at Tahan. And he was not alone. 10, maybe 12, hard-faced men stepped out from the rocks, surrounding the canyon rim. They were trapped. "The colonel figured you'd come sniffing, you murdering filth." Crowley sneered. "He said to let you find it. Makes for a much cleaner trap. He said to tell you he appreciates you gathering his enemies in one place. You and the traitor's widow." Tahan did not look up. He did not raise his hands. He grabbed Eliza's arm, his grip painful. "The horses," he whispered. "Run!" he yelled, shoving her toward the canyon entrance. The world exploded in gunfire. Bullets whined from the rocks, kicking up dust, splintering the crates. Tahan grabbed a burning stick from the fire they had built and thrust it into the dry brush piled against the ammunition. A desperate gamble. They sprinted for their horses, which were hidden just outside the canyon mouth. The brush caught, flames licking at the crates. "Get them!" Crowley screamed. They reached the horses, scrambling into their saddles. Tahan did not take the main trail. He spurred his stallion to the right, into a narrow, winding gorge that seemed to lead nowhere. Eliza was right behind him, bent low over Patience's neck, riding as he had taught her. The bounty hunters were in pursuit, their horses thundering behind them, their shots echoing in the confined space. Red dust filled the air, so thick it was hard to breathe. Eliza pulled her Colt. She did not aim. She just fired back over her shoulder, forcing them to keep their distance. The gorge narrowed, the walls so close she could touch them. It was a dead end. "Tahan!" she screamed. He did not slow. He veered left, into a crack in the rock wall she had thought was solid stone. It was a game trail, barely wide enough for a single horse. They plunged into the darkness. The sounds of pursuit and gunfire suddenly muffled. They rode for what felt like an eternity, scrambling up the narrow path before emerging into a small, hidden basin. High on the mountain, they were safe. The silence was deafening. Eliza was shaking, her lungs heaving. She was alive. "We made it," she gasped, turning to him. "Tahan, we—" He was slumping forward, his hands clenched in the stallion's mane. "Tahan." He slid, bonelessly, from the saddle, landing in a heap on the ground. "My God," she whispered. She leaped from Patience, rushing to his side. There was a dark, spreading stain on his buckskin shirt, High on his side, he had been hit. He had been hit back in the canyon, and he had ridden for a mile, bleeding, without making a sound. "It is nothing," he grunted, trying to push himself up. His face was pale, beaded with sweat. "Be still," she commanded, her voice sharp. The panic was rising, cold and fast. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking. She tore at his shirt, ripping the cloth. The bullet had gone clean through, high on his ribs. It was a mess of blood and torn muscle, but it looked high. Maybe it had missed his lung. She had nothing, no bandages, no water. She looked down at her own clothes. Without thinking, she grabbed the hem of her petticoat, the last useless remnant of her civilized life, and ripped a long, clean strip of cotton. Her hands were on his bare skin. It was hot, slick with sweat and blood. She felt the hard plane of his ribs, the tight muscle, the long, puckered scar that ran along his shoulder. She was acutely aware of him, of his body, of the heat of him. She pressed the wad of cloth to the entrance wound. "Hold this, hard!" He hissed, a sharp intake of breath, but his hand came up, covering hers. His hand was large, rough, calloused, swallowing hers completely. His skin was hot against hers. They were kneeling, face to face, their hands pressed together on his bleeding side. The world shrank, became just that single point of contact, the raw panic, the adrenaline, and a terrifying, unspoken intimacy. He was watching her. His eyes were not cold. They were clouded with pain, but they were seeing her. He, the man of stone, was vulnerable. His life was in her trembling hands. His hand over hers was a brand, a heavy, calloused weight that pressed her own fingers into his bleeding side. The heat of him was staggering. Eliza looked at his face, only inches from her own, and saw the pain tightening the corners of his eyes, the gray pallor under his red skin. "We have to move," she said, her voice a harsh command that surprised her. "We cannot stay here. They will come." Tehan's eyes focused on her. He gave a single, pained nod. He was a warrior, and he understood. He took his hand from hers, leaving her own slick and red. "Press it," she ordered, pushing the wadded petticoat back against the wound. "Hard." He did, hissing as the movement pulled at the torn muscle. Eliza scrambled to her feet. She looked around the small, rocky basin. It was exposed. There was no real cover, except for a dark shadow under a high ledge of granite, a shallow hollow that was more a scoop than a cave. It was 20 yards away. "Can you stand?" she asked. "I will stand," he grunted. He put his free hand on the rock behind him and tried to push himself up. His body, so full of grace and power, was uncooperative. He made it to one knee, his breath shuddering, and then faltered. Eliza did not hesitate. She dropped her revolver back into its holster and moved to him. She put her shoulder under his good arm, wrapping her own arm around his hard, narrow waist. "Now," she said. He leaned on her, and the weight of him was shocking. He was a heavy, solid man, and she was a small woman, but she braced herself, her legs straining, together, a grotesque, staggering single creature. They moved. He half walked, half dragged his feet, leaving a dark trail in the dust. Every step sent a jolt of pain through him, and she felt it in the tensing of his muscles, the sharp, indrawn breaths. They reached the hollow, and he collapsed, sliding down the rock wall to sit on the dusty floor. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps, his body covered in a cold sweat. "The horses," he managed, his eyes closed. "I will get them," she said. She ran, her body screaming with the exertion, her heart a cold knot of fear. She retrieved the 2 mounts, their reins, and the saddlebags, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unbuckle the straps. She brought the horses to the mouth of the shallow cave, hobbling them just out of sight. She returned to him with her canteen. It was nearly empty. "You need water," she said. He opened his eyes. They were unfocused, glazed with the first tendrils of fever. "The wound," he whispered. She knelt before him. The makeshift bandage was already soaked through. "I have to clean it. I need more water. And I do not know. Something for the bleeding." He shook his head. "No time. They will be on us. The canyon. The fire. It will not hold them long." "I have to," she insisted. She was no longer afraid of him. She was afraid for him. "You will stay here. I will be fast." She took her canteen and her rifle. Before he could protest, she was gone, slipping out from the cave and disappearing into the rocks. She moved as he had taught her, not as a panicked woman, but as a shadow. She moved toward the darker patches of rock, the places where moisture might seep. She was lucky. Less than half a mile away, she found it, a dark stain on a rock face, a slow, steady drip, 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 into a shallow stone basin. It was barely a cupful. She knelt, filled the canteen with the precious, metallic-tasting water, and drank the last of it from the basin herself, her throat aching. She hurried back, her eyes scanning the ridges, her rifle heavy in her hands. He was where she had left him, but he was worse. The fever had taken hold. He was shivering, though the air in the hollow was warm. His head was lolled to one side, and he was muttering, his voice low and thick. She knelt, her heart twisting. She put her hand on his forehead. He was burning. "Tahan." He did not respond. He was in another place, another time. He spoke in his own language, the words sharp and pained. "I be Shiyash." He tossed his head, his hand grabbing for the knife that was no longer at his belt. "Dine." Eliza did not understand the words, but she understood the agony. This was the man from the cliff top, the man who had lost his world. He was reliving the fire. "It is all right," she whispered, her voice unsteady. She did not know who she was talking to, him or herself. "You are safe." She tore another long strip from her petticoat. She unstopped the canteen and poured a small, precious amount of water onto the cloth. She began to clean the wound. He flinched, even in his delirium, but she held him steady, her touch firm. She washed away the blood and grit. The bullet had passed clean through his side. High up, it was a miracle of inches. It had missed his lung, missed his heart, but it had torn him badly, and he had lost too much blood. She ripped more cloth, making thick pads, and pressed them to the entrance and exit wounds. She tore a final, long piece and wrapped it tightly around his chest, binding the pads in place. He cried out, a low sound of pain that cut her to the quick. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." She finished. He was pale, his breathing shallow. The shivering was worse. She took her own bedroll and his, unrolling them and covering him. It was not enough. He was a large man, and the shock was making him cold. She hesitated for only a second. She lay down beside him, on top of the blankets, pressing the length of her body against his uninjured side. She was not a wife. She was not a prize. She was a small source of heat, and he was a man dying of cold. She put her arm over his chest, holding him, trying to force her own life, her own warmth, into him. He muttered again, his body rigid with fever dreams, but after a time, under her warmth, his shivering began to subside. He lapsed into a deep, unconscious state. Eliza lay there for hours. The sun moved across the sky, and the shadow of the ledge they were in deepened. She did not sleep. She watched him. She watched the hard line of his jaw, the surprising length of his eyelashes against his cheek, the silver medallion that rested in the hollow of his throat. She had stripped him bare, not his body, but his soul. She had seen his grief on the cliff. She had heard his nightmares in the fever. The warrior, the savage, the killer. That was all armor. This was the man. He was broken, just as she was. The armor she had built around her own heart, the hard shell of her grief for Luke, cracked. It fell away, leaving her exposed, raw, and aching with a feeling that was not pity. It was something deeper, something terrifying. The fever broke just before dawn. The heat in his body, which had been a furnace, subsided, leaving him drenched in sweat and cold. But his breathing was deeper. He was sleeping, truly sleeping. Eliza extricated herself from the blankets, her own body stiff and cold. She added a few dry sticks to the small, smokeless fire she had dared to build deep in the cave, and huddled by it, waiting. He woke when the sun was high. She was dozing, sitting up, her rifle across her lap. A small sound, a shifting of the blankets, made her eyes snap open. He was looking at her. His eyes were clear. The fever was gone. He was terribly weak, his face drawn and pale, but he was himself. He just looked at her, his gaze intense, searching. He saw her, not the Bilagana, not his captive. He saw the woman who had killed for him, who had patched his wound, who had laid her body against his to keep him from freezing. Eliza felt a flush rise up her neck. The intimacy of the night, of her tending to him, of him seeing her now, was too much. It was more naked than if they had been unclothed. She had seen his soul, and now he was seeing hers. She stood up abruptly, her movements jerky. "You're awake. You need water." She busied herself with the canteen, her back to him. "You stayed," he said. His voice was a dry rasp. She poured a little water into a tin cup. "I did not have a choice. You would have died." "Yes," he said, "I would have." She turned, holding the cup. She had to kneel to give it to him. She held it to his lips, her hands shaking slightly. He drank, his eyes never leaving her face. He was watching her as if she were a puzzle he had finally solved. She pulled back, standing up again, needing the distance. I should check the horses. We need to find food." She turned to go, to escape the confines of the cave and the intensity of his gaze. His hand shot out. It was weak, not the iron grip of the day before, but he caught the hem of her torn, dirty skirt. He held it. "Do not," he whispered. She froze, her back to him. "Elsa," he said. It was the first time he had said her name. It sounded different in his mouth, the E long and soft. She turned slowly. He was still holding her skirt, his knuckles white. "You were meant to be mine." He breathed. His eyes were burning. All the life he had left concentrated in that gaze. "The spirits, when they took my wife, they did not leave me empty. They sent me to you. You are my path. The spirits gave you to me." The words hit her like a physical blow. It was the claim from the village, but 1,000 times more dangerous. He was not talking about property. He was talking about destiny. He was claiming her soul. The fire that had been born in her, the fire that had killed the Apache, flared. She stepped closer, pulling her skirt from his weak grasp, and knelt before him again. She was no longer his nurse. She was his equal. She put her hands on the blanket, on either side of his hips, leaning in until her face was inches from his. "Then beg for my love, warrior," she whispered, her voice fierce, trembling with an emotion so powerful it choked her. "Win it! Do not claim it!" The air in the cave was still. The challenge hung between them, sharp as a blade. He was a warrior, a man of pride. He was wounded, helpless, and she had just demanded his surrender. He stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face. He saw the tremor in her lips, the unshed tears in her eyes, the raw strength she did not know she possessed. He saw his own brokenness reflected in her. His hand, which had fallen to his side, moved. It was slow, an effort of pure will. He did not grab her. He did not pull. He raised it, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing across her dry, chapped lips. His touch was rough, but impossibly gentle. And then, with the last of his strength, his hand moved to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her matted hair. He did not pull her down. He guided her. She did not resist. She met him halfway. Their lips met. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of grit and salt and desperation. It was rough, his dry, fevered lips demanding, claiming, answering her challenge. And it was gentle, a surrender, an admission of a need so profound it terrified them both. It was a kiss that tasted of blood and gunpowder and the cold, clean water from the rock. It was a brand, a seal, a promise of a future that neither of them believed they would live to see. It lasted only a moment. He had no more strength. He released her, his hand falling away, his head dropping back onto the saddle he was using as a pillow. He was breathing hard, his eyes closed. Eliza pulled back, her own lips burning. She was breathless. The cave was silent, but the air was electric. He opened his eyes. The warrior was gone. The coldness was gone. All that was left was the man, Tahan, and he looked soft. He looked unguarded, and the sight of it made her heart ache.
There is a valley,
he whispered, his voice barely audible.
north of here, hidden, the Dine, my grandfather. He raised horses there, good water, good grass.
Eliza frowned, her brow furrowing.
What are you saying?
This, he said, gesturing weakly to his wounded side, to the cave. This war with Beckett, it is a sickness. It ends, or I end. He turned his head, his gaze finding hers again. I do not want to die. Elza, I want to live. I want to raise horses in that valley. He held her gaze, and she understood. He was not just talking about himself. He was offering her the only thing he had left. Not a prize, not a possession, a dream, a fragile, impossible chance at a life. This was his beginning. This was how he would beg. Eliza opened her mouth to speak, her heart so full she thought it might break. A sound. Tahan's eyes snapped wide. His entire body went rigid. He did not look at her. He stared past her, toward the mouth of the cave. His hand, the one that had just touched her, balled into a fist. He raised one finger, pressing it to his lips. Eliza froze. She stopped breathing. And then she heard it. From outside, the scrape of a heavy boot on stone, a low, gravelly voice, carried on the wind. The blood trail ends here. They are in this hollow. Get ready, boys. The colonel wants the woman alive.
The colonel wants the woman alive.
The words, lazy and final, echoed in the shallow cave, snuffing out the fragile warmth of their shared breath. Tahan's body, which had been pliant and soft in her arms, became stone. His hand, the one that had touched her face, clamped over her mouth, a silent, desperate command. Eliza's heart stopped. The dream of a valley with horses and water, the taste of his kiss, all of it evaporated. The cold, brutal reality was here, at the mouth of their shelter. Tahan's eyes, burning with a new, feverish light, darted to the back of the cave. He released her, his movements agonizingly slow. He put his lips to her ear, his breath hot, his whisper a mere puff of air.
Behind the blankets, a crack in the stone. Go!
Eliza looked where he pointed. It was a dark fissure, a shadow in the rock, barely wide enough for a child.
I will not,
she whispered back, her voice shaking.
I will not leave you.
His face contorted, a mask of pain and fury. Go, Elza! Live! Go north! He shoved his long knife into her hand, his hand closing over hers on the hilt. For me, live! He was pushing her, trying to force her toward the back of the cave. But it was too late. A shadow fell across the entrance. Jeb Crowley stood there, his rifle leveled, his yellow-toothed grin a slash of triumph. Now, Crowley drawled. No need for goodbyes. The colonel wants you both. Behind him, 3 more men fanned out, their pistols drawn. Tahan moved. It was not the fluid grace of the panther she had seen before. It was a broken, lurching roar of a man who had nothing left. He used his good leg to launch himself from the ground, his wounded side screaming in protest. He was not trying to escape. He was trying to buy her 1 more second. He slammed into the first man, his shoulder hitting the man's chest. The man, unprepared for the attack, stumbled back. Tahan's hand, the one he had just given her the knife from, was empty, but he used it like a claw, raking at the man's face. The cave exploded with sound. The man fired his pistol, the shot deafening, the muzzle flash a blinding white light. Tahan grunted, a sound of pure animal rage, and went down, but he dragged the man with him. Eliza did not run. She did not hide. The woman who had been a Texas widow was gone. She raised her Colt, the one Tahan had given back to her, and she fired. 1, 2. The man who had shot Tahan slumped. Crowley, his eyes wide, dove for cover. Another man, who had been raising his rifle, cried out and clutched his shoulder. "She is armed!" Crowley screamed from behind the rock. There was a moment of pure, ringing silence. Tahan was on the ground, unmoving. "They have got captives," Eliza breathed, her eyes adjusting to the smoke-filled light. She saw them now, huddled at the cave entrance, dragged along by the bounty hunters, a Navajo woman and 2 children. In the chaos, one of the children, a small girl maybe 7 or 8 years old, her face streaked with tears and dirt, broke free. She saw the dark fissure at the back of the cave, the one Tahan had pointed out, and she ran for it. Crowley rose from his cover, his face purple with rage. He saw the girl escaping. He raised his rifle, swinging the butt of it not at the child, but at Eliza, the immediate threat. Eliza had 1 shot left. She saw the girl. She saw Crowley's motion. She had a second. She could shoot him. She could shoot to kill. But she did not. She screamed, "No!" and threw herself, not at Crowley, but at the girl, shoving the child toward the crack. She put her own body between the girl and the man, a human shield. The girl stumbled into the darkness of the fissure. Safe. Eliza turned, raising her empty gun. She never saw the blow. She only felt a blinding, white-hot explosion of pain at the base of her skull. And then the rock floor rushed up to meet her. The last thing she heard was Crowley's satisfied, cruel laugh. She woke to a world of pain. Her head was a pulsing ball of agony. Her hands were bound behind her, and every jolt of the horse she was slung over sent fresh waves of sickness through her. She was tied face down, her cheek rubbing raw against a sweat-soaked saddle blanket. She could smell the horse, and she could smell the unwashed man riding it. She drifted in and out of consciousness. She remembered moments, a cold wind, men laughing, the flicker of a campfire. She was given water, a canteen pressed to her cracked lips, but she was given no food. Her body was a single, dull ache. Her mind was worse. Tahan, was he alive? She had seen him fall. She had seen the flash of the gun point blank. He had to be dead. The thought was a cold, hard stone in her chest, heavier and more final than even Luke's death. Luke had been an ending. Tahan had been a beginning. After what felt like days, but was probably only 1. They stopped. She was hauled, unceremoniously, from the horse and dumped on the ground. She lay there, her body refusing to move, until a rough boot kicked her in the ribs. "Get up, Colonel's property. Welcome to the fort." She pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet, her bound hands making her clumsy. She was in the center of a large, muddy courtyard, surrounded by high, crumbling adobe walls. It was an old Spanish presidio, a fortress in the middle of nowhere. its gates reinforced with new, raw timber. Men were everywhere, all of them hard-faced, all of them wearing the same B brand that had been on the men Tahan had killed. Crowley grabbed her by the arm. "The colonel's waiting, and he ain't patient." He dragged her across the courtyard, past a smithy and a line of horses, toward a 2-story building that looked like it had once been a chapel. He shoved her through a heavy wooden door, into a room that was surprisingly civilized. A large oak desk sat on a Navajo rug. The one in her hogan had been just like it. Books lined a shelf. A map of the territory was pinned to the wall. A man stood at the window, his back to her. He was not a ruffian like Crowley. He was tall, dressed in clean, dark trousers and a white shirt. His hair was iron gray, cut short, military style. "Leave us, Jeb," the man said. His voice was not a drawl. It was educated, crisp, and cold as a winter morning. Crowley grunted. "She's a feisty one. Colonel, killed 2 of my men." "Did she now?" The man turned. "I am not surprised. Leave us?" Crowley left, pulling the door shut with a heavy thud. The man looked at her. His face was clean-shaven, his features sharp. His eyes were a pale, piercing blue, and they held no warmth at all. He looked at her as if she were a new species of insect. "Mrs. Thornton," he said. He did not smile. "Eliza. May I call you Eliza? I am Colonel Beckett." Eliza said nothing. She just stood there, her hands tied, her head throbbing. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble," Beckett continued, his voice conversational. He picked up a cigar from his desk. "These rifles, they were a significant investment. You and your savage friend cost me a small fortune. But then, you cost me Jeb Crowley as well, and 2 of his idiots. So perhaps you have done me a service. Good help is so very hard to find." He lit the cigar, his movements precise. "I knew your husband, you know." Eliza's blood ran cold. "Oh, yes," Beckett said, puffing the cigar to life. "Luke Thornton. A decent man. A weak man. He had an arrangement with me. He would move my less conventional freight, and I would ensure his wagons were not touched. It was a perfectly simple, profitable arrangement." He walked around the desk, closer to her. But then he got greedy, or perhaps he grew a conscience. It is so difficult to tell the two apart these days. He tried to renegotiate. He tried to threaten me. He threatened to go to the marshals. Beckett smiled, a thin, reptilian motion of his lips. "I find that so very distasteful." This was him, the man who had given the order, the man who had left her a widow. The hate that rose in her was so pure, so acidic, it nearly choked her. You killed him," she whispered. "I removed a problem. Eliza." Beckett corrected her, as if instructing a child. "Just as I was about to remove another." He gestured to the map. "Tahan Grey Wolf, my greatest failure and my greatest creation." Eliza stared, her mind unable to process the words. "Oh, you did not know," Beckett chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That is rich. He did not tell you." He leaned against the desk, his arms crossed. "I found him 10 years ago, a half-starved boy whose family had been wiped out by the cavalry. I took him in. I saw the fire in him. I taught him. I taught him English. I taught him how to read a map, how to track a man, how to kill without sound. He wore the insignia of the very men who had slaughtered his family." He pointed to the silver medallion at his own throat, identical to Tahan's. "I gave him this, a reminder of who he was and who he belonged to." "He was my best scout," Beckett said, his voice laced with a sudden, cold anger. "My right hand. He hunted his own people for me. He brought me captives. He was my son in all but blood." Eliza felt the floor tilt beneath her, the kiss in the cave, the story of his wife and child, the valley. It was a lie. All of it. He was one of them.
He was a monster, just like this man. The nausea rose in her throat, a bitter flood of betrayal.
And then, Beckett continued.
He betrayed me. He turned. He started freeing my captives, sabotaging my shipments. He thought he could undo what he had done. He thought he could find redemption, as if such a thing exists.
He looked at her, his blue eyes dissecting her. And now he has found you, the traitor's widow.
How very poetic. He has a weakness for lost causes. It will be his death. He is dead,
Eliza said, her voice hollow.
No, Beckett said, and for the first time, he looked annoyed. He is not. He killed the man who shot him and escaped into that fissure. That crack in the rock. The girl got away too.
He shook his head.
My men are incompetent, but he is badly wounded. He will die in the hills. A fitting end. But you...
He straightened up. You are another matter. You are not a lost cause. You are a commodity. You will be on a wagon to Chihuahua in the morning. A certain gentleman there pays exceptionally well for spirited companions, especially fair-haired ones. He turned his back on her.
Take her to the cells, and make sure she is clean. I want top dollar.
The rain began that night, a cold, driving downpour that turned the courtyard into a sea of mud. Eliza sat in a small, windowless cell, its floor wet and cold. They had taken her, washed her with cold, harsh soap, and thrown her a clean, rough cotton shift. The betrayal was a sickness in her stomach. He had used her. He had seen her grief for Luke, and he had used it. He was no better than Beckett. He was Beckett. Hours passed. She was cold, alone, and hopeless.
A sound, a scrape. Not from the door, from the wall.
She looked up. There was a small, high window, barely a slit, barred with a rusted iron rod. A shadow was there. The rod groaned. The sound of metal straining. It popped free, pulled outward. A face appeared, upside down. In the slit, rain-soaked, black hair, a face pale as death, streaked with mud and blood. Tahan. He was alive. He was hanging from the roof, his good arm braced. He reached down, his hand grasping, his fingers inches from her.
Elsa, come.
His voice was a ruined whisper. She just stared.
Elsa, now, Beckett, he is not, he...
He was in agony. He had climbed the wall, wounded, in the rain. For her? Her mind was a war. He betrayed you. He is a killer. He is like Beckett. He came back. She stood on the small stone cot, her fingers wrapping around his wrist. His skin was ice cold, but his grip was strong. He pulled. She scrambled, finding purchase, and he hauled her up, out of the cell, onto the slippery adobe roof. The rain was a solid sheet, the wind howling. The courtyard was dark, save for a few torches.
How?
She breathed, crouching beside him.
I know this place,
he grunted, pressing his hand to his side. The bandage she had made was gone, replaced by a fresh and already soaked one. I lived here for 5 years. He pulled her along the roof line, toward the back wall.
There is a fire at the stables, a diversion. We have moments.
As if summoned, a cry went up.
Fire! The stables are burning!
Men ran, shouting, toward the bright orange glow that was now lighting the fort. Tahan led her to the edge of the parapet. A rope, his own lariat, was tied there. She stopped. She turned to him, grabbing the front of his torn, soaked shirt. The man she had kissed, the man who had lied.
You worked for him,
she hissed, the rain and the wind whipping her words away.
You were his dog.
He froze. Even in the dim, fire-lit rain, she saw the terrible pain in his eyes. And it was not from his wound.
Eliza, not now. We must go.
You hunted your own people, she accused, her voice breaking, the tears and the rain indistinguishable on her face. The insignia, the shirt, it was true. It was all true. He grabbed her, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his chest. His body was trembling. From cold, from blood loss, from the force of his words. Yes, he breathed into her hair. It is true. I was his. I was a monster. I did things for him. Things that sleep with me every night. I was him until he burned my family, until he took everything. He pulled back, his hands gripping her shoulders, his gaze desperate, begging her to understand. I killed him in my heart that day. Elsa, I have been running, fighting, trying to burn his mark from my soul. Now, let me get you out of here. An alarm bell began to clang. A bullet whined past her head. They have seen us. Tahan shoved her toward the rope. Go down. She scrambled over the wall, her hands raw on the rope, and slid, burning her palms, to the muddy ground outside. She looked up. Tahan was on the wall, preparing to follow. A figure appeared on the parapet behind him, silhouetted against the roaring flames of the stable. Colonel Beckett. He raised a rifle, his form calm and steady. He was not aiming at her. He was aiming at Tahan. Tahan! She screamed. Tahan threw himself, not climbing, but just falling, from the wall. He hit the ground in a heap, his body crying out in a pained grunt as he landed on his wounded side. Beckett fired. The shot went wide. He screamed in rage, his voice a thin, animal sound, lost in the storm and the fire. Tahan grabbed her hand. Run! They did not look back. They plunged into the darkness, into the driving rain, into the vast, unforgiving desert. Behind them, the fort was a beacon of fire, and the man who had created them both was still alive, watching them go. They ran. They did not speak. The only sounds were the suck and pull of their boots in the mud, the howl of the wind, and the ragged, agonizing gasps from Tahan. The rain was a physical assault, cold and blinding, washing the mud from the high desert ground and turning the world into a slick, gray nightmare. Tahan's hand, locked in hers, was a grip of pure, desperate strength. He was pulling her, leading her, even as his body was failing. He knew this land, even in the dark, even in the storm. He led her away from the trails, into the washes and arroyos that were beginning to fill with fast-moving, shallow water. He was putting distance and broken terrain between them and the fort. Eliza's lungs burned. Her legs were heavy, her palms raw from the rope. But she ran, matching his stumbling, lurching pace. The betrayal she had felt, the acidic, bitter poison in her stomach, was gone, burned away by the truth of his return. He had been a monster. He had told her, and then he had climbed a fortress wall, bleeding to death, in a storm, for her. The scale of his atonement was staggering. They ran for what felt like hours, long after the shouts and the alarm bell from the fort had faded, swallowed by the wind. The driving downpour began to ease, the thick, heavy drops thinning into a cold, persistent drizzle, a dusty rain that was half mist, half water. The world was gray, the pre-dawn light a sickly, bruised purple. Tahan stumbled. He did not just trip. His legs, which had carried him through sheer, agonizing will, finally gave out. He fell to his knees in the shallow, muddy water of the wash, his grip on her hand finally releasing as he pitched forward, catching himself on his hands. Tahan, she cried, dropping beside him. He was done. He could not go on. His body was shaking violently, his breath coming in shallow, wet coughs. Blood was welling from his side, a dark, pulsing stain in the gray light. The rain-soaked bandage useless. He had torn the wound open again in the fall from the wall. "We have to stop," she said, her voice frantic.
She looked around. They were in a wide, shallow canyon, the rocks offering little shelter. "Here, against the wall." She put her arms around him, pulling him. He was a dead weight now, his strength gone. She dragged him the last few feet, out of the running water, to the base of a small, undercut ledge. He slumped against the stone, his head falling back, his eyes closed. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice a ruin. "Be still," she commanded, her hands moving to his side. She had to see. She tore at the makeshift bandage, her fingers clumsy with cold and fear. The wound was a raw, gaping mess. He had lost too much blood. He was dying. He was dying right in front of her. "It is no use," he panted, his hand coming up, not to stop her, but to catch her wrist. His grip was weak, his skin like ice. "Do not say that," she said, her voice breaking. She tried to pull her wrist free, to tend to him. "Eliza, look at me." She stopped, her gaze meeting his. His eyes were clear, the fever gone, but they were filled with a terrible, final clarity. All the armor was gone. The warrior, the scout, the monster. All of it was stripped away. All that was left was the man, Tahan, and he was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world. I have to," she whispered, her tears falling, hot onto his cold, wet face. "I have to stop the bleeding." "It does not matter," he said, his voice stronger for a moment. "He was right, Beckett. What he told you, it was true, all of it. I was his son. I was his creation." "I know," she said, her voice thick. You told me you killed him in your heart." His face twisted. "Words, just words. I hurt you." He used his last strength, pushing himself up, away from the rock. He was not on his knees, but he was kneeling, his body supported by his one good arm, his head bowed. He was a penitent, his black hair plastered to his face by the rain. "I am not asking forgiveness for what I was, for the men I killed, for the people I betrayed, the spirits. They will judge me for that." He looked up, his eyes locking with hers, and the agony in them was so profound it stole her breath. I am sorry, Elsa. I am sorry that I hurt you. I used your trust. I saw your light, and I used it. I let you touch me. I lied to you, not with my words, but with my silence. That is the sin I cannot carry. Forgive me for that." He was not asking for absolution. He was asking for a single, final grace. Eliza looked at the man kneeling in the mud, this broken, dying warrior, the man who had saved her, captured her, taught her, and lied to her, the man who had come back for her. Her heart, which she had thought was a dead, hard stone, broke. It shattered. She reached out, her trembling hands cupping his face, her thumbs wiping the rain and mud from his cheeks. She saw his soul, raw and exposed, and it was not the soul of a monster. It was the soul of a man. "There is nothing to forgive," she whispered. "I see you, Tahan. I see all of it. I see you." She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the desperate, passionate kiss of the cave. It was a kiss of tears and rain and absolution. It was a promise, and it was a goodbye. He leaned into her touch, a sound, half sigh, half groan, escaping him. She pulled back. She had given him his peace. Now, she had to be strong. "But you are wrong," she said, her voice hardening, the practical, sharp edge returning. "Words are not enough. Love, it does not save anyone. Tahan, only actions. You told me Beckett was alive. You told me he would hunt us. He will not stop. He will not let us go. He nodded weakly, his head heavy in her hands. He will not stop. Then we do not run, she said, a terrible, cold calm settling over her. She looked at his wound, at the pale, setting sun that was beginning to tear a hole in the clouds, painting the sky a violent, bloody red. We stop, we end this, for Luke, for your wife, for your son. We end him. He looked at her, a flicker of the warrior's fire returning to his eyes. He saw the woman she had become. The widow from Texas was gone forever. In her place was a killer. Where? He breathed. You know this land, she said. Where would you make a stand? Where would you hunt a man like Beckett one last time? He was quiet for a long time, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. The Red Spire, he whispered. A place of high rocks, a narrows. 1 man can hold it against 10, or 2. Can you make it? She asked. He looked at her, at the resolve in her face. He did not smile, but the shadow of one touched his lips. I will make it, he said. It took them 3 hours. It was an eternity of agony. Eliza was his crutch, his strength. He was a dead weight, but he was a moving weight. He directed her, his voice a faint whisper, guiding her up the narrow, rocky trail, away from the wash. The wind was rising again, the drizzle stopping, the air growing cold and sharp. The sky had cleared, and the setting sun was a wound in the west, bathing the entire world in a theatrical, hellish red light. The wind whistled through the rocks, kicking up sand that stung their faces, sharp as glass. They reached the place. It was a natural fortress, a narrow gap between 2 towering sandstone pillars. It was the only way through the ridge. Here, Tahan, he panted, collapsing behind a high wall of fallen rock that gave them perfect cover. They could see the trail below for a 1/4 mile. He will come. This way, he will be arrogant. He will come himself. Rest, Eliza said. She checked her Colt. She had taken cartridges from the dead man in the cave. It was fully loaded, 6 shots. She took the rifle from Tahan's saddle, which he had miraculously managed to bring with him. She had his knife. She settled in beside him, her back against the rock, her rifle resting on the stone parapet. And they waited. They did not wait long. He came, just as Tahan had said. He was not riding with an army. He had 2 men, Jeb Crowley and 1 other, but Beckett himself was in the lead, his horse moving at a fast, impatient walk. He was a hunter, his rage at their escape having overridden his caution. They came this way, Crowley called out, pointing to the tracks in the sand. They are on foot. Colonel, the savage is bleeding bad. They cannot be far. He is mine, Jeb. Beckett's voice was clear in the wind. The woman you can have, but the traitor, he belongs to me. They were 50 yards out. Now, Tahan whispered. He had his own revolver, the one he had taken from the man he killed in the cave. His hands were shaking, but his arm was resting on the rock. Eliza centered the rifle's sight on Jeb Crowley's chest. She breathed out, just as Tahan had taught her. She did not pull the trigger. She squeezed. The shot was a flat crack in the wind. Crowley stared, his hand grabbing at his chest, a look of surprise on his face. He toppled from his horse. Before the second man could react, Tahan's revolver barked. The man cried out, clutching his arm, and wheeled his horse, fleeing back down the trail. Beckett did not flee. He was off his horse in an instant, diving behind the same rocks his men had used. A soldier's reflex. Tahan! He roared, his voice filled with a personal, venomous hatred. You cannot run. You dog, I will have your scalp, and the woman's. He fired. The bullet slammed into the rock above Eliza's head, sending stone chips stinging into her face. He is pinned, Tahan panted.
trying to reload his revolver. His fingers were clumsy. "Stay down," Eliza yelled. She fired the rifle again, at the rock Beckett was hiding behind, forcing him to keep his head down. The wind howled, a screaming, banshee wail. The sand was a horizontal sheet, visibility dropping to a few yards. The red sky was darkening to a deep, bruised purple. He will circle," Tahan whispered, his eyes scanning the rocks above them. "He knows. This place, he will get above us." "I see him," Eliza said, her voice deathly calm. She had seen the movement, a shadow, detaching itself from the rocks to their right, scrambling up the cliff face. She raised the rifle. She tracked him. He was fast. He was a professional. He was moving from cover to cover. "Tahan, I need you to draw his fire," she said, her throat tight. He looked at her. He understood. He gave a single nod. He raised his head, deliberately, above their rock wall. "Beckett," he yelled, his voice a hoarse croak. "You are a ghost." A shot. From above. It slammed into the rock where Tahan's head had been. He had ducked just in time. But Eliza had him. She saw the muzzle flash. She saw the shadow. He was exposed for 1 second. She fired. A scream, a real human scream of pain and rage, and then silence. "Did you?" Tahan breathed. "I do not know," Eliza said, her heart hammering. "I do not know." The silence stretched, broken only by the wind. They waited. 1 minute, 2. A figure rose from the rocks. It was Beckett. He was not dead. He was hit, in the shoulder, his left arm hanging useless. But in his right hand, he held his revolver. He was walking toward them, out in the open, his face a mask of pure, insane fury. He was done with tactics. "You whore!" he hissed, his gaze on Eliza. "You cost me everything." He was 20 yards away. He was limping, but he was coming. Tahan raised his own revolver. He and Beckett fired at the same time. The world exploded. Tahan cried out, a sharp, terrible sound, and his body was thrown back, his gun clattering on the stones. A dark, spreading stain appeared on his chest. Beckett stopped. He stared. He, too, had a new red stain on his white shirt, just over his heart. He looked down at it, a look of profound, almost comical surprise on his face. He looked back at Eliza. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He just fell. He crumpled, boneless, into the red sand. He was still. The past was over. Luke was avenged. "Tahan!" Eliza screamed his name, a raw, primal sound of pure loss. She scrambled to him, dragging his head into her lap. His eyes were open, but they were unfocused, staring at the darkening sky. The hole in his chest was dark, terrible. "Tahan, no, please," she wept, her hands pressing against the wound. A useless, desperate gesture. "Elza," he whispered. His eyes found hers. He was smiling, a faint, weak smile. You did it. You set us free. Do not leave me," she begged, her tears washing the blood and grit from his face. "Do not leave me here alone. You promised me a valley." He raised his hand, his fingers weak, and touched her cheek. "It is beautiful, the valley." As he spoke, the wind died. The air became still, and then a single cold drop of water hit Eliza's forehead. Then another and another. The sky opened up. The first, heavy, cleansing rain of the season began to fall. Not a drizzle, not a storm, but a steady, hopeful, renewing torrent. It was washing the blood from him. It was washing the desert clean. He looked at her, his gaze full of a love so profound it was a physical thing.
If this is death, he whispered, his voice a fading breath, I would die in your arms. His hand fell from her face. His eyes, still fixed on hers, glazed over. Tahan, she whispered. She shook him, gently. Tahan! But he was gone. Eliza Thornton sat alone in the high desert, in the pounding, cleansing rain, holding the body of the man she loved, and she howled her grief to the empty, listening sky. The howl was a blade of sound in the sudden, heavy silence of the rain. It was not a cry of fear or of battle. It was a sound of absolute, final desolation, the sound of a world ending. Eliza held Tahan's body in her lap, his head cradled against her chest, her own body a shield against the cleansing water that washed the blood and life from him. The red desert was gone, turned to a world of gray mud and streaming rock. His eyes were open, fixed on her, but they were empty. He was gone. She did not feel the cold. She did not feel the stinging rain. She felt nothing. The past was avenged. Luke was avenged. Tahan's family was avenged. But the future was a vast, empty canyon. She had won, and she had lost everything. She would just sit here, in the mud, and let the cold take her, too. It would be a fitting end. A sound cut through her grief and the hiss of the rain. It was the clatter of a shod hoof on stone. Eliza's head snapped up. Her body, which had been numb, was suddenly alive with a last, useless jolt of adrenaline. Beckett, one of his men, had survived. The one who had fled, he had come back. She let Tahan's head rest gently in the mud and grabbed her rifle. Her hands were stiff, her fingers raw, but she worked the lever, chambering around. She was not a warrior. She was not a widow. She was just a cornered animal, and she would take one more of them with her. She pressed her back against the rock, the rifle raised, her gaze fixed on the narrow trail leading up to the spire. A horse appeared, its head down, its rider slumped against the rain. Then another, and a third. It was not Beckett's men, it was the Navajo. The young scout, the one who had brought the news of Beckett to the village, was in the lead. Behind him was the old man, the elder, his face a grim mask in the rain, and on the horse behind him, huddled under a thick blanket, was the small boy, Samuel, the child she had saved in the cave. They stopped, their horses steaming in the cold air. They looked at the scene. They saw Beckett's body, a heap of wet clothes in the sand. They saw Crowley, further down, already a part of the mud, and they saw her, the white woman, her rifle aimed at them, her face a mask of grief and mud, her clothes soaked and torn. The old man dismounted, his movements stiff. He did not look at her. He walked past her, his gaze fixed on Tahan. "He is dead," Eliza said, her voice a raw, broken croak. I tried." The elder ignored her. He knelt beside Tahan, his movements slow and practiced. The young scout dismounted and stood guard, his rifle held loosely, watching her. The old man placed his leathery, wrinkled fingers on Tahan's neck, under his jaw. He pressed them against the artery. He waited, his eyes closed, for a full minute, a statue in the pouring rain. Eliza held her breath. The elder opened his eyes. He looked at Tahan's face, then at the terrible, dark wound in his chest. He said nothing. He simply, methodically, began to push on Tahan's chest, a hard, rhythmic pump. He barked an order. The young scout joined him, lifting Tahan's shoulders. They were not mourning him. They were fighting for him. "He is not gone," the scout said, his voice flat, not looking at her. "Not yet. His spirit is walking. The cold has kept it close." The small boy, Samuel, ran to her. He did not touch her, but he stood close, his dark eyes wide, looking at her with a strange, fierce loyalty. He was the one. He had run from the cave, back to the village, and brought them. He had saved them. The men worked, their movements urgent. They lifted Tahan's body, a dead, heavy weight, and strapped him over the saddle of the scout's horse. The old man tore a strip from his own blanket and bound it tightly, around Tahan's chest, a desperate attempt to hold what little life was left inside him. The scout turned to her. "You will ride," he said. It was an order. He pointed to Tahan's stallion, which had been standing, patient as stone, just down the trail. Eliza moved, her limbs stiff and robotic. She was no longer a person. She was a witness. She mounted the great black horse, its strength a palpable thing beneath her, and she followed them, a ghost in their midst, leaving the bodies of her past to be washed away by the rain. They rode for days, or perhaps it was one long night. Eliza did not know. They rode without stopping, the rain finally easing, the world turning back to dust. When they reached the hidden canyon, the village was silent, waiting. They carried Tahan into his hogan. The medicine woman, a hatali, was already there, her herbs and chants ready. She was an old, ancient woman, her eyes as bright as a bird's. She worked for hours, cleaning the wound, packing it with a dark, pungent poultice of juniper and sage, stitching the torn flesh with a sinew thread. She sang, a low, monotonous, hypnotic song, calling Tahan's spirit back from the place it was walking. Eliza was pushed aside. The women of the village would not let her near. She was the Bilagana, the white ghost, the source of this bad medicine. She was the omen who had returned, bringing their warrior back. But as a corpse, she sat outside the hogan, her back against the mud wall. For 2 days, she did not eat, she did not sleep, she just waited. The small boy, Samuel, would bring her water, placing it on the ground near her and then running away. On the 3rd day, the medicine woman emerged, her face gray with exhaustion. She looked at Eliza, her bright eyes sharp. She did not speak, she just gestured, with a flick of her chin, for Eliza to enter. He was alive, but only just. He was lying on the sheepskins, his body still, his face pale as ash. His breathing was so shallow she could not see his chest move. He was in a deep, dark sleep, a place she could not reach. Eliza knelt beside him. The Hatali watched her, then nodded once, and left them. The vigil began. For days, Eliza did not leave the hogan. She was his anchor. She was his tether to the world. She dipped a cloth in cool water and wiped the fever sweat from his brow. When his lips cracked, she wet them. When the medicine woman brought broth, Eliza was the one who patiently, hour after hour, forced tiny spoonfuls between his teeth. And she talked. She knew he could not hear her, but she talked anyway, her voice a low, constant murmur in the juniper-scented dimness. She was terrified that if she stopped, the silence would claim him, that he would slip away into the walking place for good. She told him everything. She told him about her small house in Texas, about the color of the paint in the kitchen. She told him about Luke, about his kindness and his weakness, and the guilt she felt for having seen that weakness and loved him anyway. She told him about her journey, her foolish, blind quest for a revenge that had tasted like ash. "You have to wake up, Tahan," she whispered, her hand wrapped around his skin still so cold. "You have to. You promised me a valley. You cannot break your promise. You have to show me the valley with the good grass and the water. You have to beg me. Remember, you have not won me yet. Warrior, you have to wake up and fight for me." She read to him from the small, leather-bound Bible she had carried, the one she had thought she had lost. Samuel had found it in her saddlebag and brought it to her. She read the Psalms, her voice soft, not for the words of her God, but for the cadence, for the sound of life. Outside the hogan, the village was a storm of fear and anger. Beckett was dead. Yes, but Tahan, their son, their protector, was dying. And it was her fault. The white woman had brought this. On the 7th day, the elder came. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette blocking the light. He was not alone. The young scout and 2 other warriors stood with him. "You will come," the scout said, his voice hard. Eliza placed Tahan's hand gently on the blanket. She stood, her back straight, her body aching with exhaustion. She walked out of the hogan, into the bright, pitiless sun. The council was gathered. The men of the village, the elders, sat in a circle. This was a trial. She was led to the center. She was alone. The old man, the elder, stood. He spoke, his voice a low, angry rumble. His words for his people. The scout translated, his voice devoid of emotion, each word a stone. "You are Bilagana. You came to our land and brought the ghost, Beckett. You were Tahan's shadow. He went to fight your war, and it brought Beckett's men to our sacred places. He, Tahan Greywolf, he is our shield, and you have broken him." The accusation was absolute. She was a bringer of disaster. "The council has decided," the scout continued, his own gaze hard. "You are bad medicine. You will leave. You will walk away from this canyon, and you will not return. If you are found on our land after the sun sets, you will be hunted. This is the word of the people." They were casting her out, to walk back, alone, into the desert that had almost killed her. It was a death sentence. Eliza looked at their faces, at the wall of anger and grief. She was terrified. She wanted to weep. She wanted to beg. But the woman who had sat by Tahan's bed, the woman who had faced Beckett, was not a beggar. She felt a cold, clear anger rise in her, an anger that burned away her fear. She stood tall. She looked not at the scout, but at the old man, the elder, and when she spoke, she did not speak in English. She spoke in the broken, halting Navajo she had learned, the words Tahan had whispered to her, the words she had practiced in the hogan. No, she said, her voice shaking but clear. The council stirred. She had spoken their tongue. Beckett was not my ghost," she said, her hands clenching. She pointed to her own chest. "He was my enemy. He was your enemy. He was a poison. Here, in your land." She took a step forward. Tahan fought him. Anai, enemy, and I." She held up her hands, her palms still raw from the rope, her nails broken. "I fought too." She looked at the old man, her gaze locking with his. "I fought for Tahan. I fought for the Dine. I killed Beckett. I killed his men." Her voice rose, gaining a strength she did not know she possessed, the strength of her grief and her love. Dini, this land. I fought for this land. As one of you." The silence was absolute. The wind had stopped. The scout's mouth was open. The warriors stared, their anger replaced by a stunned, reluctant awe. This white ghost, this omen, had stood before them and claimed them. She had claimed their land and their fight as her own, in their own sacred words. The elder did not move. He stared at her, his ancient eyes reading her soul, searching for the lie. He saw none. He saw only a woman who was as broken and as fierce as the land itself. He held her gaze for a full minute. Then, slowly, so slowly, he gave a single, deep nod. He turned his back on her and walked away. The council was over. The warriors, one by one, stood and dispersed, their faces no longer angry, but filled with a new, strange respect. She had earned her place. Eliza stood alone in the center of the village, her legs shaking so hard she could barely stand. She turned, her body moving on its own, and stumbled back to the hogan. She had won, but she was so very, very tired. She collapsed on the sheepskins beside Tahan. She took his hand. It felt warmer. She put her head on his chest, not to listen for his heart, but just to rest. Tahan, she wept, her voice muffled against his shirt. I cannot fight them, too. I cannot do this alone. Please, Shiaj, my love, please wake up. A sound, a dry, rasping cough, so faint she thought she had imagined it. She sat up, her head snapping back. His eyes were open. They were not the glazed, empty eyes of the man who had died in her arms. They were not the clouded, feverish eyes of the man in the coma. They were clear. They were weak. But they were his. He was looking at her. He tried to speak. His lips moved, but only a dry sound came out. Tahan, she breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. A smile. It was the faintest shadow of one. A bare, weak twitch of the muscles at the corner of his mouth. But it was a smile. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He saw the tears on her face, the fear and exhaustion from her trial still clinging to her. He saw the woman who had stood before the council. He swallowed, his throat working. He raised his hand, his movement agonizingly slow, and touched her wrist. You do not have to, he whispered, his voice a dry, rasping ruin. He spoke in English for her. You do not have to apologize, Elsa, for being here. Not anymore. She let out a sound, a choked, strangled noise that was half a sob, half a laugh. I thought you were dead. She wept, her tears falling onto his hand. You died. You died in my arms. Yes, he whispered, his own eyes shining. I think I did. She clutched his hand, bringing it to her lips, pressing her face against his rough knuckles. His skin was warm. He was alive. He had come back. She held his hand, her tears and her smile all one. A new reign, a new beginning. The sound of his breathing was the only thing in the universe. It was not the shallow, agonizing rasp of the man on the verge of walking. It was the slow, weak but living breath of the man who had returned. Eliza sat by his side in the dim, juniper-scented hogan, her hand holding his, a link she refused to break, as if he were a kite and she the string, keeping him tethered to the earth. He slept for 2 days, a true, healing sleep. The medicine woman, the Hataliyi, came and went, her bright eyes now resting on Eliza with a neutral, professional respect. She brought poultices and a bitter bark tea, and Eliza was the one who administered them. She was the one who spooned broth between his lips, who wiped his face, who sat guard while he fought his way back. The village, too, had changed. The council had been a trial of fire, and she had not burned. When she emerged from the hogan for water, the faces that turned to her were no longer hostile. They were curious, they were wary, but the open hatred was gone. The elder's nod had been a command. She was no longer the Bilagana. She was Ashihi, the one who had stood her ground. On the 3rd day, Tahan's fever was gone. He was awake, truly awake, his eyes clear and sharp. Though his body was a wreck, he could not sit up. The wound in his chest was a map of his ordeal, stitched and bound, but a terrible, deep injury. You are a bad patient, Eliza whispered, her voice rough from exhaustion. He tried to smile. It was more of a grimace. You are a worse nurse. His voice was a dry, scraping sound. You talk too much in your sleep. Eliza felt a flush creep up her neck. I do not. You told me about a blue dress in Texas. You hated the color. She stared at him, her heart doing a slow, painful flip. He had heard her. When he was in the darkness, in the walking place, he had heard her. I will stop talking, then, she said, her voice small. No, he whispered, his fingers tightening on hers. Do not stop. It was the rope. It pulled me back. His healing was a slow, agonizing process. It took weeks. He was a man made of sinew and impatience, and being trapped on his back was a kind of hell for him. He was weak. He, who had moved like a panther, had to be helped by her to sit, to drink. The vulnerability was a raw thing between them. She saw the shame in his eyes when his hands trembled, when he could not lift the water skin. Be still, she would tell him, her voice firm as she had at the Red Spire. You are healing. Even a warrior must heal.
A warrior who cannot stand is not a warrior, he rasped, his frustration a palpable thing.
You are wrong, she said, wiping his brow. You are Tahan. That is enough.
While he healed, the world outside the canyon, the world they had broken, began to heal too. The young scout, Kale, the one who had led the rescue, returned from a long ride. He came to Topin's Hogan, his report for his chief, but his eyes including Eliza. The fort is empty, Kale said, his Navajo words slow, for her benefit. The men who followed Beckett are gone, scattered. They have no leader. They are just bandits now, not an army. He unwrapped a cloth, and on the floor of the Hogan, he placed a familiar, heavy, silver-backed buckle. We found him, Beckett. The land is cleaning itself. Tahan just closed his eyes. Eliza felt the tension leave his body. A long, slow sigh. It was finished. The ghost was buried. A week later, another visitor came. Not a scout, but a small detachment of blue-coated soldiers, riding under a blue flag of parley. The village was a tense, buzzing hive, but Tahan, leaning against the doorframe of his hogan the first time he had stood in a month, met them. Eliza stood beside him. She was not his prize, not his captive. She was his shield, just as he was hers. The man in charge was a young, tired-looking captain. He looked at Tahan, at the healing wound in his chest, at the white woman standing beside him as if she belonged there, and his expression was one of profound confusion. Colonel Beckett is dead, the captain stated. Yes, Tahan said. The territory is quieter than it has been in 5 years. The captain continued. The Apache raids, they have stopped. The bounty hunters are gone. We have been authorized to open new talks for a lasting peace with the Dine. He looked at Tahan's chest, at the tarnished silver medallion that Beckett had given him. You were a scout. You served. I served the people, Tahan said, his voice stronger now, heavy with authority. I serve this land, your army, his army. They are the same. They come, and they burn. We are tired of fire. The captain nodded, his gaze respectful. He was not like the others. He was a man who wanted an end, not a victory. The war is over, if you want it to be. We are prepared to honor the boundaries of this canyon, and we would like to extend an invitation to you to come to the fort, to speak as a leader. Tahan just stared at him. The man who had been a pariah, a traitor to his own people, was now being called a leader by his enemies. I will speak, Tahan said, but not at your fort. I will speak here, on my own land. The captain agreed. He left, and the village, which had been holding its breath, let out a collective sigh. The world was changing. Summer came. The high desert bloomed. A fierce, sudden explosion of purple sage and yellow rabbit brush. Tahan's strength returned. The wound in his side was a puckered, angry scar. But he could walk. He could ride. He was still Tahan. He found Eliza by the stream one morning, where she was washing clothes. He stood beside her, watching the clear water run over the stones. The valley, he said. She looked up, her hands still in the water. What about it? It is time to see it.
She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. "Can you ride that far?" "I can," he said. "The question is, will you?" He was not asking her to follow him. He was not claiming her. He was inviting her. "Yes," she said. They packed. It was not much. 2 bedrolls, some dried jerky, 2 horses. As they were mounting, a small figure appeared. Samuel, the boy who had saved them. He had been a silent shadow in the village, his eyes always on Topin's Hogan, always on Eliza. He stood by Tahan's black stallion, holding a small bundle of his own. He did not speak. He did not ask. He just stood there, his small, 8-year-old face set in a mask of determination. He would not be left behind. Eliza looked at Tahan, her heart aching. The boy was an orphan, just as Tahan had been, just as she was, in her own way. Tahan looked at the boy for a long, silent minute. He dismounted, his movements still stiff. He walked to Samuel and knelt, so their eyes were level. "The valley is hard work," Tahan said in Navajo. "It is a place for building, not for hiding." "I am not a hider," Samuel said, his voice small but fierce. "I am a builder." Tahan's hand rested on the boy's head. He nodded once. "Then you will need a horse." They rode north, the 3 of them. They rode for 2 days, into the high country, leaving the red rock of the canyon for the deep green of pine and aspen. And then they found it. Tahan stopped his horse on a high ridge. Below them was the valley. It was just as he had promised. It was not a canyon, but a wide, sheltered meadow, a river of green grass protected on all sides by high, pine-covered mountains. A clear, fast stream cut through the middle of it. It was a place of impossible peace. "My grandfather, he built his hogan. There," Tahan said, his voice thick, pointing to a cluster of old, strong-willed cottonwood trees. They rode down. They found the ruins, the stones of his grandfather's home, long since tumbled. They made their camp, and they began to build. It was the hardest work Eliza had ever known, but it was not the desperate, grieving work of survival. It was the slow, steady, satisfying work of creation. Tahan, his strength returning with every stone he lifted, showed Samuel how to set the foundation. Eliza, her hands, which she had once thought of as soft, now calloused and strong, mixed the mud and straw. They were not alone for long. The village, the one she had feared, had adopted them. Kale, the scout, appeared one day with 3 men. They brought timber, logs cut from the high mountains. They brought mares, the start of the horse herd Tahan had dreamed of. The women came, bringing seeds for Eliza corn, beans, and squash. They brought her a loom and taught her how to weave the strong, bright patterns of the dine. The elder came. He watched Eliza planting the corn seeds in the rich, dark earth by the stream. He nodded, his ancient face crinkled in approval. He said, "The rain you brought, it was strong medicine." Tahan translated, standing beside her. They have a new name for you." "A name?" "They call you Niltsa Nadil Yehi," he said, his voice soft, "the one who brings the rain." Eliza looked at her hands, covered in the dark, fertile mud. She was no longer a ghost. She had a name. She had a home. That night, as Tahan and Samuel slept, wrapped in their blankets inside the half-finished hogan, Eliza sat by the fire. The past was finished. Beckett was dead. Luke was avenged. But there was one last string to cut. She pulled from her saddlebag the letter she had written to her sister, the one she had carried from Texas, the one full of fear and justifications. She opened it, her last tie to that white, civilized world. She read it, and it was the voice of a stranger, a weak, frightened woman she no longer knew. She set it aside. She took out a fresh piece of paper, a pencil stub the captain had given her, and she wrote a new letter. My dear Sarah, she wrote, I am alive. I am well. I have found the peace I was looking for. Though it is not the peace we were taught to seek. The man who killed Luke is dead. The debt is paid. But I am not coming home. I am home. Here, I have a son, Samuel, and I have a man, Tahan. He is a good man. He is a strong man. We are building a life. Do not weep for me. I have never been more free. She signed it. Your sister, Eliza. She looked at the two letters, the past and the present. She folded them both, the old and the new, and she placed them together into the heart of the fire. She watched the edges curl, the ink turn brown, the paper blacken and lift into the night sky as ash. She was letting it all go. Months passed. The hogan was finished. The corral was built. The mares had foaled. The valley was alive. Another visitor came. Not a soldier this time. A white man in a dark suit. A man from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. He rode a mule, and he carried a briefcase. He looked out of place. A black crow in a field of green. He had come to find the Navajo peacemaker. Mr. Grey Wolf, the man said, standing stiffly by their fire. My name is Agent Thorne. I am here on behalf of the United States government. Tahan just looked at him, his arms crossed. Samuel stood beside Eliza, his hand holding hers. We have heard what happened with Colonel Beckett, Thorne said, and we are prepared to offer you a position, a formal post, as an intermediary for the dying, a peace commissioner. There is a salary, $300 a year. He was offering to pay Tahan to be what he already was. Tahan looked at Eliza. She saw the shadow of a smile in his eyes. He bent down, scooped up a handful of the dark, rich earth from his valley, and let it run through his fingers. This is my salary. Tahan said, I will not be an employee of your government. I will not wear your badge. Thorne's face fell. I see. Then the peace. The peace will hold, Tahan said, his voice a commanding rumble. Because I will be here to hold it. I will speak for my people, and I will speak for the land, but I will not be your man. I am my own. We have a home to protect. That is more payment than your gold. The agent, flustered, argued for a time, but it was useless. He was speaking to a mountain. He finally nodded, packed his briefcase, and rode away. Eliza and Tahan stood watching him go until he was just a small, black speck against the green. The war was over. The revenge was done, but this was the truly terrifying part. The future, the quiet, day-to-day work of living. He will be back, Eliza said. They will always come back, Tahan agreed. She looked at him, at the man she had pulled back from death, the man who had pulled her back from her own. It is just beginning, is it not? He turned, his face soft in the evening light. He took her hand, his calloused palm fitting against hers. Yes, he said, it is just beginning. The winter had been hard, but the valley had held them. The snows in the high country had been deep, piling in drifts against the pine trees. But down in their meadow, the stream had kept flowing and the small, solid hogan Tahan had built was warm. It smelled of juniper smoke and drying herbs, and the corn Eliza had ground and stored. Now, spring had come. It came not as a gentle suggestion, as it had in Texas, but as a fierce, sudden command. The snow on the high peaks, the ones Tahan called the sleeping giants, began to melt, and the stream that cut through their valley ran high and fast, no longer brown with the memory of the desert, but clear and cold and full of life. The land, which had been scorched by Beckett's malice and washed by the blood of their past, was being reborn. On the drier edges of the valley, where the meadow gave way to rock, the cactus plants bloomed. They were small, waxy, defiant flowers of crimson and yellow.
a promise of life in the places that had been defined by death. Life had settled into a new shape. It was a shape defined by the slow, steady rhythm of the land. Eliza rose before the sun, her body no longer the aching, exhausted thing it had been, but strong, lean, and accustomed to the work. She was no longer a widow, a bilagana, or a victim. She was a woman of this valley. The corn she and Samuel had planted last fall was pushing up. Sharp green blades in the dark, rich earth by the stream. The loom, the one the Navajo women had brought her, stood inside the hogan, and the blanket she was weaving was a pattern of her own, a mix of the red earth and the green meadow. Tahan was at the new corral, his body healed. The terrible wound in his chest was a puckered, silver scar, a map of his death and his return. The scar on his arm, the one from his old life, remained, and the silver medallion Beckett had given him, the one he had once worn as a mark of his service and his shame, still hung at his throat. He wore it now not as a brand, but as a reminder of the man he had been, and the man he had refused to become. He was working with a young filly, a pinto colt born just that week. His movements were not the sharp, economical motions of the warrior, the hunter who had moved like a silent phantom. He was patient. His voice was low and steady, his hands gentle on the young horse, teaching it not to fear, but to trust. He was no longer just a warrior. He was a rancher. He was a father. He was a husband. Samuel, who was 9 years old now, was no longer the silent, traumatized shadow who had first come to them. He was a boy, lean and strong, his laughter echoing in the clear air. He was mending a section of fence with Cale, the young scout from the lower village, who now visited often, bringing news and sitting by their fire as a friend. The valley was not an escape from the world. It had become its center. That evening, the children came, a group of 5. They had walked the 4 miles up the trail from the lower canyon, drawn by the horses and by the man who had become their legend. Tahan was their hero, the man who had killed the ghost Beckett, and Eliza. She was their mystery, the one who brings the rain. They sat around the fire, their dark eyes wide, while Eliza roasted corn and Tahan smoked a small pipe, the smoke rising in a thin, peaceful blue line. Samuel sat slightly apart, acting the part of the proud older brother, the one who belonged. "Tell us a story, Tahan," one of the smallest girls asked, her voice shy. Tell us about the red spire. Tell us how you killed the ghost." Eliza paused, her hand holding the corn. Tahan drew on the pipe, his face in shadow. He did not like to speak of that day. He did not like to remember the hate or the blood. "That is not a story for a spring night," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That is a story of winter. Tonight is for planting." "Then tell us a new story," the girl insisted. Tahan was quiet for a long moment. He was not a natural storyteller, not in this way. He was a man of action, of silence. He looked across the fire, his gaze finding Eliza where she sat, her head bent, the firelight catching the gold in her hair. I will tell you a story," he said, his voice soft. He set his pipe aside. The children huddled closer. "There was a warrior," he began, his voice taking on the low, formal cadence of the Navajo storytellers. "He was not a good man. He was a man whose heart was a handful of ash. His world had been burned, his family taken to the spirit world, and he was alone. He was a hunter, and he hunted a ghost. The man who had burned his world." The children nodded, their eyes wide. They knew this part. "He hunted this ghost for many seasons," Tahan continued, his gaze still on Eliza. "He thought only of his revenge. His heart was a stone. And then, one day, the spirit sent him someone, a woman. She was not of the people. She was from the east, a bilagana, with eyes the color of the sky before a storm, and hair the color of dry grass.
She was lost, just as he was. Her world had been burned, too. Eliza looked up, her hands still in her lap, her heart aching with a sweet, familiar pain. The warrior, he was a fool. He was arrogant. He thought she was weak. He thought, because he had saved her, that she belonged to him. He called her his prize. The children gasped. Eliza smiled, a small, sad smile, into the shadows. "But the woman from the wind," Tahan said, his voice dropping. She was not weak. She had a fire inside her, a fire that matched the desert. She looked at the warrior, and she saw the monster he was, and she was not afraid. "What did she do?" Samuel asked. Though he knew the story, he wanted to hear it again. She challenged him," Tahan said. "She told him that he could not claim a heart. He had to earn it. She told this warrior, this man of stone, that if he wanted her, he would have to learn to beg." "Beg," the little girl whispered, scandalized. "Warriors do not beg." "This one did," Tahan said, his voice so soft it was almost lost in the crackle of the fire. "He did not know how. It was the hardest battle he ever fought. He had to fight the ghost. He had to fight his own past. He had to die and be born again before he knew how. He had to learn that a heart is not a thing you win. It is a thing you are given, and you must be worthy of it." He looked at Eliza, his love for her a raw, open thing in the firelight, a thing these children could see and understand without words. "Did he learn?" the little girl asked. "Did he beg for her?" Tahan held Eliza's gaze. "He is learning," he whispered. Eliza's hands, which had been still, resumed their mending. She looked at the circle of children, and then at the warrior who was her husband. "And then," she said, her own voice clear and steady, her English words a quiet counterpoint to his story, "she let him win." The children, not understanding the layers, but understanding the peace, laughed. Tahan smiled, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. Later, the children were asleep, wrapped in blankets near the warmth of the hogan. Samuel was inside, in his own bed of sheepskins, in the deep, untroubled sleep of a boy who is finally safe. The valley was quiet. The silence was not the empty, terrifying silence of the high desert, the silence that had followed the gunfire. This was a full silence. It was the sound of the stream singing over the rocks, the sigh of the wind in the new pines, the distant, soft stamp of a horse in the corral. Eliza stepped out of the hogan. The moon was a sliver, the stars a thick, diamond-bright spill across the black sky. The air was cold, sharp, and clean. He was already there, standing by the corral, looking out at the meadow, at the land that was his, that was theirs. She stood beside him, not touching, just sharing the peace. They stood like that for a long time, a man and a woman who had been forged in the same fire, two jagged pieces that had somehow made each other whole. Eliza thought of Luke. The memory was no longer a sharp, agonizing blade. It was a soft, sad warmth, a part of her, a good man she had loved. But it was a finished chapter. She was not a widow. She was Eliza. Tahan looked at his hands in the starlight. They were scarred, calloused. They were the hands that had killed for Beckett. They were the hands that had killed Beckett. But they were also the hands that had built this hogan, the hands that trained his horses, the hands that held his son. He looked at the scar on his chest, the place where Eliza's love had pulled him back from the walking place. The sky was vast, open, limitless. It did not care what color their skin was. It did not draw the borders that men did. It was just the sky. The land was just the land. It did not care who was Navajo and who was white. It only asked for work and for respect, and they had given it both. Tahan turned to her. He did not speak. He did not need to. His hand, the one that had held a knife, came up, and it was gentle. He touched her face.
his thumb brushing her cheek, a touch as familiar as her own skin. She leaned into it, her eyes closing, her own hand coming up to cover his. He leaned down. She rose to meet him. They kissed, there, under the stars, in the quiet of their valley. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the cave. It was not the grieving, absolving kiss of the rain-swept battlefield. It was a kiss of mourning. It was a kiss of peace. It was not a claim, and it was not a plea. It was a promise, not of forever, but of now, of this life, of this home. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers. They did not need promises. They did not need words. They had their freedom. They had it together. In the land that burned them both, love took root and never begged again. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I am so glad you joined me for this journey. Where are you listening from? I would love to hear your thoughts on Tahan and Eliza's story in the comments below, so we can share our ideas. Please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And if you really enjoyed it, please support us by hitting that hype button, so this story can be heard by even more people.